Chapter 51. David let out a long sigh. There were still too many flaws in his actions this time. However, due to the existence of the shadow attendant, there was no substantial evidence of his actions in this incident. Of course, if he was an ordinary person, he would have been taken away by the military police to assist in the investigation. Regardless of whether he was the culprit or not, the military style was to interrogate before finding out. However, with the identity of the descendant of the Nation Knight title, although this title had no practical benefits for David, it was enough for the military to consider the impact when dealing with him. Just as David was thinking, the identity bracelet in his hand issued another notification. It turned out that another 24 hours had passed, and he could absorb and fuse new knowledge orbs. Of course, there was only one knowledge orb left. Spear Mastery, 99% Mastery, Knowledge Orb. This was the highest level of knowledge orb he had ever obtained. It was a little higher than the 98% mastery level of electronic countermeasure. Spear Mastery was a combat ability, which was harder to achieve than electronic countermeasure. Shadow Attendant, fused with Spear Mastery, 99% Mastery, Knowledge Orb. David pressed his hand on the Shadow Attendant and ordered with his mind. Then he felt the dark yellow knowledge orb move into his body. Then his vision blurred, and his body appeared in a martial arts arena. The body in the illusion was holding a spear and constantly doing the same thing, stabbing. David felt the flow of power in this body. It was an ordinary stab, but it mobilized all the muscles and bones in the body. It was almost a non-stop stab. When the spear stabbed out, the air seemed to be cut, making an ear-piercing sound. This movement seemed to never stop, and David could not control his body. He could only feel it passively. After an unknown period of time, 5 years, or even longer, the body in the illusion was still stabbing. But now, when the spear pierced out, there was no sound at all. At the tip of the spear, after every stab, there would be a small white mist. After the air was compressed by the stab, the heat released in the instant after the stab stopped would turn into smoke. After this, the illusion finally changed to a battle with the insectoids. The spear-wielding Kaji was different from the dual-wielding Kaji in yesterday's illusion. He had never fought alone, and every time he fought, he would have the support of several companions. David finally understood why Spear Kaji wouldn't fight alone. It was because Spear Kaji's style of fighting was to attack. Without the protection of the other Kaji, Spear Kaji would have died countless times over. The illusion ended after a few hundred battles. In fact, the spear knowledge had already been grasped in the previous practice. The later battles were more about how to cooperate with his companions. After coming out of the illusion, David quickly looked at the time on his bracelet. Only 10 minutes had passed. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. That stab practice made him feel as if a few years had really passed. After all, no matter how many battles he fought with the insectoids and the illusion, it was still much better than the boring and monotonous practice. Sensing the emptiness of the shadow attendant's body, David couldn't help but feel pity for the dead Mr. Stett. He had been shot by a sniper rifle from so far away, and he hadn't been able to harvest Stett's soul. However, he soon realized that his mentality was wrong. This was the first time he had killed someone with his own hands, and he didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. Instead, he leisurely cultivated at home, and even regretted that he hadn't absorbed Mr. Stett's soul. He went to the bathroom mirror in his bedroom and looked at himself in the mirror. He had youthful skin full of collagen, short blonde hair, and blue eyes. He looked like a teenager. However, he also noticed that his eyes in the mirror had a trace of indifference. It was an indifference to life. This was due to the influence of the knowledge orbs. David didn't know whether this influence was good or bad, but he knew that becoming stronger was the foundation to survive in this world. He would never regret fusing with the knowledge orbs. Although Mr. Stett was dead, the organization behind him still existed. Even a big businessman like Mr. Stett was only a peripheral member of the organization. One could only imagine how terrifying the organization was. According to Jeremy, the organization valued the title of Nation Knight very much. Perhaps they would use other methods to deal with him and his father, Hans. The next morning, after David woke up, he habitually turned on his identity bracelet to check the situation outside his house. This was something he had done every day after he was put under surveillance, especially after the security system of his house was strengthened. The new security system allowed him to have a 360-degree view of everything around his house without any blind spots. A military hover car attracted his attention. The other party didn't seem to have any intention of hiding and just stopped in front of David's house. Through the window, David saw that the person sitting in the driver's seat was the stubborn Staff Sergeant Emery. David activated Myron's contact number and waited for 2 seconds before the call was connected. "David, you're calling me so early." Myron's voice was full of confusion. It seemed like he hadn't woken up yet. "Myron, it's 6 o'clock. Why aren't you up yet? Did you forget Uncle Garen's request?" David said unhappily, "I was scared last night, so I slept a little late." Myron heard Garen's name and immediately woke up. He smiled awkwardly and then changed the topic. "David, what happened?" "Staff Sergeant Emery's military vehicle is parked on the street outside my house. I wonder what he wants to do," David said as he sent a picture taken by the surveillance camera. "That's it," Myron smiled and said, "I know about this. I forgot to tell you yesterday. The military needs to express their attitude. Not just your house, even my house as a military vehicle. Before the investigation team from the top comes to a final conclusion, they need to know our whereabouts. Of course, this is just a superficial gesture. Think about it. If the military really didn't want you to know, why would they send Staff Sergeant Emery to park his vehicle so conspicuously outside your house? Then I'll stay at home for a few days. Too bad I was going to go to the shooting range with you," David said with a sigh. "I'll be cooped up at home for a few days, too. It shouldn't be long. I'll arrange for the shooting range. I'll show you my marksmanship then," Myron said with a smile. During the few days he was being taught by Garen, he had been beaten down by David. It could be said that during the entire teaching process, David had been practicing by himself, while Myron had been constantly beaten down by Garen. David had never used a gun before. Going to the shooting range might be a rare opportunity for Myron to suppress David. He was even more enthusiastic than David. After ending the call, David no longer paid attention to the situation outside. It was better that Staff Sergeant Emery was there. At least he wouldn't be in any danger for a while. With the military watching over him, it could be said that he was protected by the military. Even if the organization changed their mind, it wouldn't be easy to deal with him. At the very least, they would have to wait until the military left before they could act. Days passed. Staff Sergeant Emery and another sergeant took turns to stay outside David's house. David himself was very busy. When he woke up in the morning, he first practiced the 18 styles of body arts, then practiced the war hammer, heavy axe, spear, long sword, and shield. For this, he even bought the heavy axe, spear, long sword, and shield for practice. As for why he didn't use a level 2 long sword to practice his long sword mastery, it was because he didn't want to accidentally tear down his house. A level 2 long sword could easily cut through any part of his house. During the rest of the time, he also needed to enter the virtual world of the medium-sized server to practice the calculation and analysis of sniper trajectories. At night, he practiced the 18 styles of body arts again before going to bed. When the last piece of level 1 strengthened meat was consumed, it was already the 17th of January. The military surveillance personnel hadn't left yet, which made David think that something had happened to the case. However, after contacting Myron, he found out that the military investigation team that came to Parent City had met with an accident due to the level 2 Zerg's attack. The military was mobilizing people to hunt down the level 2 Zerg, so they didn't have time to deal with a case that was almost settled. Staff Sergeant Emery also didn't receive any orders to return, so he could only continue to stay outside David's house. Chapter 52. David's estimation of himself was a little off. His status panel showed: name, David Kerr, strength 3, 24, 1, agility 2, 1, physique 3, 24, 1, spirit 3, 4, 1, literature 3% proficient, mathematics 5% proficient, general 51% proficient, physical arts 1% proficient. Electronic countermeasures, 98% proficient. Warhammer Mastery, 84% proficient. Sniping, 20% proficient. Shield Mastery, 50% proficient. Heavy Axe Mastery, 70% proficient. Longsword Mastery, 80% proficient. Spear Mastery, 99% proficient. With all the level 1. Strength and Meat, plus the 18 styles of physical arts training twice a day, his strength was only 0.01 points away from the 3.25 points required for 1,000 kilograms. His physique had also improved due to the proficiency level of physical arts. This was probably one of the benefits of mastering the proficiency level of physical arts before 1,000 kilograms. His physique would constantly improve due to mastering the proficiency level of physical arts ahead of time. David had talked with Myron before. Myron's physique had not improved for a long time before he met Garen. Under Garen's guidance, his physique and strength had slowly improved. Moreover, the speed of physique improvement was very slow, far slower than the speed of strength improvement. David's agility had also increased by 0.1 points, reaching the current 2.0 points. However, since yesterday, his strength and physique had stopped at 3.24 points, no further progress. Even if he relied on his proficiency level of physical arts and persisted in practicing the 18 styles of physical arts seriously, it did not improve his strength and physique. If David took the level 2 strengthening potion at this time, he estimated that he could directly cross this hurdle and reach 1,000 kilograms of Kaji's basic strength. However, David believed that Garen would not lie to him. Since he said to take as little strengthening potions as possible, he would not take the level 2 strengthening potion unless it was a last resort. Now, he had only been in this world for 20 days, and his strength had increased to a level unimaginable by his predecessor. He had great confidence in himself breaking through the shackles of 1,000 kilograms. After 10 days of crazy practice, his mastery of various combat abilities had matched the actual display on the status panel, especially his Warhammer Mastery. Due to the Storm Warhammer technique, his proficiency had increased a little during this period. This filled him with hope of going to Nan University and learning more advanced techniques. David, I'm at your doorstep. David received a message from Myron. David felt a little strange. Was the military surveillance over? Why would Myron come looking for him at this time? Opening the gate, David first saw Myron's Gladstone Type 6. Myron jumped out of the car, and the military vehicle that was originally parked on the side of the road disappeared. David, let's go to the shooting range. Myron called out to David without even entering the door. Myron, has the military investigation finished? David asked curiously. An expert came yesterday, but he only stayed for 3 hours before leaving. His conclusion is that there is no problem with the city defense system, and he agrees with the city defense team's opinion. Myron replied with a smile. It's finally over. David finally let go of his last bit of worry. Get in the car. I've been bored to death these past few days. Myron urged. Wait, I need to get something. David didn't immediately get in the car, but turned and ran back home. Soon, he ran out while carrying the scabbard on his back and got in the car. Oh my God, David, you're carrying a long sword when you go out. Be careful. Uncle Garen will give you trouble if he finds out. Although Myron said so, his eyes were full of envy. With my mastery of the Warhammer, Uncle Garen won't say anything. But Myron, how's your practice going recently? Have you started? David asked with a smile. I've already started, Myron said proudly. But when he thought of David in front of him, who had just started, he couldn't maintain his pride. In fact, he didn't start early, but when he practiced the Storm Warhammer technique last night, he suddenly realized and reached the beginner level. If there was no comparison with David, his speed was definitely a genius. Of course, the most important thing was Garen's hands-on teaching, which allowed him to reach the beginner level so quickly. The Gladstone Type 6 drove towards the south of the city. David remembered that there was a civic square there. It was the place where Perrin City held large-scale open-air events. That was the direction they were heading. As expected, Myron stopped the car when they arrived at the civic square. The two didn't have to worry about parking the car, as the Gladstone Type 6 would automatically find a parking spot. Myron, is there a shooting range here? David looked around, but there wasn't a building that fit the description of a shooting range. Hee hee, you don't know about this. Follow me, Myron said as he led David into the civic square. Then, they stopped in front of a door with the words Underground Civil Defense written on it beside the civic square management office. He swept his ID bracelet on the door, and the door opened. What appeared in front of them was a reception hall. The decoration of the hall was very simple. There was only a counter and a photon computer. There was nothing else. It didn't look like a shooting range at all. Minnie, is Jim here? Myron asked the beautiful woman who was watching a video at the counter. Young Master Myron, Mr. Jim is at the shooting range. He said that you can go in directly. The woman called Minnie stood up and replied with a smile. Then, she pressed her hand on the table, and the wall beside her moved aside to reveal a flight of stairs. David, let's go in. Myron nodded to Minnie and said to David. David followed Myron to the stairs, which were 5 meters wide. This is an underground civil defense facility. It's usually empty and rarely used, so the owner, Jim, rented the underground space here and set up a shooting range for members. It's usually used by people he knows, Myron explained to David. Underground civil defense facilities can be rented. David didn't know much about the law, but he knew that it was absolutely forbidden to occupy civil defense facilities. Jim's father is First Lieutenant Eaton, Myron said softly. David understood instantly. Although First Lieutenant Eaton's position in the military wasn't high, he was the #1 person in Parent City. Both the city government and the military had to give him some face. Besides, it wasn't a big deal. The underground civil defense facility could be used directly when it was needed. The stairs were brightly lit. The 5-meter underground space was shockingly large. The steel floor and walls made the place extremely cold. There were already 5 or 6 people shooting with weapons. Their targets were the projections. This kind of shooting method was strange, at least in David's memory. He had never seen it before. The bullets were probably special. After a bullet hit the projection's arm turned red, but it still moved to dodge. Another bullet hit the projection's left leg, causing it to lose its ability to move. Then, a few more shots hit the projection's vitals, and the projection disappeared. Although the projections didn't have the ability to fight back, this kind of practice was enough to achieve a certain level of combat effectiveness. Jim, Myron shouted. One of the people who were shooting waved his hand and put his handgun back into the holster at his waist. Then he ran over. Myron, you haven't been here for a while. I heard you're grounded. Jim mocked. He then turned to David and said, David, how are you? You're so unlucky to encounter something like that. David was shocked by Jim's enthusiasm. This person was indeed from the military. He was very direct with his words. He looked at Jim's standard military uniform and the handgun at his waist. Other than the fact that he didn't have a military rank, he was no different from an official soldier. Jim, cut the crap. Where's the thing I asked you to prepare? Myron said angrily. Myron, for your request, I specially made a trip to the military supply department and borrowed the good stuff you wanted. Jim said proudly. Jim, hurry up and take it out. The cost isn't a problem. As long as it's suitable, we won't take it away. We'll just play here. Myron said anxiously. David was also very curious. What kind of weapon would require Jim to go through so much trouble to get it? David saw a wall not far away that was full of weapons. There were all kinds of weapons hanging on the wall, and there was even an official soldier wearing a military uniform there. Chapter 53. David, don't be fooled by the fact that there aren't many people here. There's really good stuff here, Myron explained to David with a smile as Jim went to get the equipment. David understood. With the city defense team as his backing, Jim only needed to get some light firearms in a small city like this. As long as he didn't touch the heavy equipment, no one would question him. In a war zone administrative planet like Monolith, the weapons control was not too strict. Sometimes the military would even encourage the citizens to practice all kinds of firearms in the hope that they could be used when needed. In fact, the military wasn't worried about firearms. The only ones that needed to be controlled were the Kaji. The civilian Kaji's destructive power was much more terrifying than these light firearms. Here's what you wanted. Jim walked back with a rectangular box in one hand and an ammo box in the other. From the strength of his arms, it was obvious that the box was heavy. The box was placed on the ground with a dull thud. David, I'll try it out first. You can start after a while. Myron said to David as he opened the box. David nodded and looked at the box. After Myron opened the box, a sniper rifle's body was revealed. He then took out the gun barrel and stock from the box and assembled the parts. This is... David looked at the very familiar sniper rifle and asked uncertainly. If the rifle was a little longer and the body was a little bigger, he would have thought that it was a Kaji sniper rifle. This is a copy of the Death's Eye. Although it's not as powerful as the Death's, it's scaled down according to the Death's Eye. Many Kaji snipers use this copy to train. Jim proudly introduced the sniper rifle. David was also shocked. The special sniper rifle he saw in the illusion of the knowledge ball was called the Death's Eye. Jim was really resourceful. There was no information about the Death's Eye on Skynet, but there was a copy here. As for sniping Kaji snipers using the Death's Eye copy to train, it was also conceivable. With the terrifying recoil of the Death's Eye, the efficiency of training would be too low and the consumption of the body would greatly increase. Myron had already taken out a set of ammo from the ammo box and loaded it into the sniper rifle. David saw that the copy didn't switch between the two types of ammo like the real Death's Eye. Thinking about it, the copy didn't need to fire level 1 ammo, so there was no need to switch. Myron was lying on the ground, and then he called out to Jim. Jim operated his ID bracelet, and a row of 10 fixed targets was lowered from the top at a distance of 300 meters. David, watch my marksmanship. Myron gestured to David to pay attention to his performance. Then he fired the Death's Eye copy once every 5 seconds, which showed that he had been practicing with a sniper rifle. Although it wasn't the Death's Eye copy in his hand, the weapon in his hand was more accurate, so his results were naturally better. Following the sound of the Death's Eye copy in Myron's hand, the 5 people who were practicing with their handguns also stopped and walked over. Jim, how's the result? Myron asked while caressing the body of the gun. 99 points. Jim glanced at his ID bracelet and then reported the result. I should have a sniping talent, right? Myron asked with a face full of pride. Myron, in this windless indoor environment with a distance of 300 meters, you can't even hit 100 points with the Death's Eye copy, and you still have a sniping talent? Jim mocked. I feel that the result is not bad. Myron didn't continue. Although the Death's Eye copy wasn't the real thing, the recoil was extremely strong, and he needed to rest. When you hit 100%, then I'll increase your level, and you'll know how difficult it is. Jim didn't let Myron go and said again, David, you try. Myron didn't care about what Jim said. His goal was to be better than David. David was a little impatient. He came in front of the Death's Eye copy, and as soon as his hand touched the sniper rifle, he felt as if it was one with his body. His fingers moved around the ammunition box beside him, and a set of ammunition was taken out. Then he gently pressed the button, and the ammunition was loaded. The only fly in the ointment was that the Death's Eye copy didn't have the T3 sniper support device. It was just a normal scope. However, the environment here wasn't that complicated. After David loaded the ammunition and looked forward through the scope, he didn't even have time to aim before he fired. 10 consecutive gunshots rang out, and it was almost like one continuous sound. Jim, how's David's result? Myron looked at David's messy hair and couldn't help but be secretly happy. He turned his head and asked, but what he saw was Jim's strange expression. 100 points, David. Have you practiced sniping before? Jim asked curiously after reporting the result. What? 100 points with such messy hair? Before David could respond, Myron shouted in disbelief. He grabbed Jim's hand and looked at the result. There wasn't a single mistake, and that said it all. I knew I shouldn't have competed with you, he said to David with some hidden bitterness. Then he turned his head to Jim and said, David has never touched a sniper rifle before. He learns everything quickly. How is that possible? Not only Jim, but even the 5 people beside him didn't believe Myron's words. "David, are you interested in increasing the difficulty?" Jim asked David. "No problem." David nodded indifferently. He really wanted to play with the Death's Eye copy in his hand for a while longer. As long as he was given a chance, he could use the micro-scanner on him to scan the copy of the Death's Eye. Then he could restore the Death's Eye copy in the virtual world of the medium-sized server at home and slowly adjust the real Death's Eye according to the feeling in his memory. "David, I'll give you 20 seconds to prepare. The next step will be more difficult, so get ready." Jim didn't state his requirements. He believed that as long as it was the first time he came into contact with the next step, it would be very difficult to hit the target, let alone the rest. David loaded 5 rounds of ammunition in a row, filling the copy's magazine to the brim. After 20 seconds passed, Jim operated his bracelet. 10 fixed targets appeared on the furthest wall of the shooting range, and at the same time, wind began to blow in the field. David's eyes moved slightly. His experience told him that the furthest fixed target was 600 meters away. The wind was 3, 7, the temperature and the humidity were all determined. After only 2 seconds, the Death's Eye copy in his hand fired again. 10 consecutive gunshots rang out, and David ended the shooting. At the same time, his body trembled slightly in his loose clothes, eliminating all the recoil. 100 points. Jim looked at the result again, and his voice was filled with more disbelief. In such an environment, if he fired slowly, he could also achieve a score of 100 points. However, if he were to fire continuously like David, the recoil alone would cause him to lose the rest of his bullets after the first one was fired. "David, if you complete the next step, I'll give you this Death's Eye copy." Jim's eyes moved slightly as he spoke again. "Jim, you and David are both my friends. Don't get yourself into trouble just because of your personal feelings." Myron hurriedly reminded. "Myron, don't worry. I know what I'm doing," Jim said with a wave of his hand. He looked at David and waited for David's response. "Okay." David's heart warmed as he said. Before he became Kaji's sniper, this was probably his only chance to get the Death's Eye copy. He didn't know why Jim would do this, but he wouldn't be polite. Jim was the son of Parent City's top military officer. Since he was able to set up such a large shooting range here, he wasn't someone who didn't understand the situation. For him to be able to say such words, he naturally had his own plans. Chapter 54. Jim began a complicated operation on the ID bracelet on his wrist. Whirlwinds appeared in the entire underground shooting range, and at the same time, some fog spewed out, trying to simulate the real world. At the same time, the fog also changed the temperature and humidity in the air, making it more difficult to calculate the accuracy of the shot. The targets in the distance were also changed to smaller ones, and the targets began to move irregularly. There were still 10 targets in the same environment, but the difficulty was many times higher. After everything was done, Jim said in a deep voice, "David, I'll give you 30 seconds. If you can't finish shooting in this time, you won't pass." His expression was very serious, which made the people around him shut their mouths and stop talking. Myron seemed to have noticed something, and he looked at David with a gloating expression. "Begin," Jim said loudly, and a 30-second countdown appeared on his ID bracelet. David was completely focused. He was like the sniper Kaji in the illusion. After 3 seconds, the first shot was heard, followed by 2 consecutive shots. These 3 targets were the closest, so when calculating the trajectory, he only needed to remove a little bit of difference to reduce the repeated calculation and analysis. Jim's expression was very nervous. He looked at the display on his ID bracelet, and joy and disbelief were written all over his face. After 3 seconds of calculation and analysis, David fired 3 more shots, then paused for another 3 seconds, and the last 4 shots were fired consecutively. To be honest, he had experienced the real Death's Eye in the illusion. Although the recoil of this replica was strong, as long as he used his skills to suppress it, it wouldn't be a problem for him to fire 10 consecutive shots. At most, he would use a special technique to release the recoil after shooting. Therefore, The difficulty of this shooting was how to quickly calculate and analyze the influence of the surrounding environment, and use the least amount of time to find the best trajectory. If he didn't have the Death's Eye replica in his hand, but another sniper rifle, he probably wouldn't have been as accurate as before. The reason was that he didn't need to test the Death's Eye replica at all. The overall performance of the Death's Eye replica was only reduced proportionally to the Death's Eye, and within a range of 600 meters, there was almost no effect. David stood up and shook his slightly numb shoulder. It was his first time unloading the recoil, and his technique wasn't too bad, but it didn't achieve the best result. David, do you know what you just passed? Before Jim could report the result, Myron, who had been standing beside Jim and looking at the ID bracelet on Jim's hand, yelled and hugged David. What did you pass? David's response to Myron's excessive closeness was to push him away. David, you passed the Interstellar Federation's Sniper Training Ground Test. Jim's voice was filled with disbelief, but the result before his eyes was undeniable. Furthermore, David only used 15 seconds to complete the test. This is the military's Sniper Training Ground Assessment. David didn't quite believe it. Although he had obtained the knowledge of sniping Kaji, he had only done calculation and analysis training in a virtual environment and had never experienced actual operation. This was his first time using a sniper rifle, but he passed the military's Sniper Training Ground Assessment directly. David, let me explain. This doesn't mean that you have the combat ability of a military sniper. The Sniper Training Ground Assessment is just one of the military's sniper assessments. Jim explained. However, he didn't say that passing the Sniper Training Ground Assessment was basically the same as passing the military sniper assessment, because this assessment was the most difficult to pass. In 30 seconds, one had to suppress the recoil of the sniper rifle, shoot at 10 small targets that moved quickly and irregularly, and achieve a score of 95 points and above. With the influence of the wind and fog, this kind of result was extremely difficult to achieve. Soldiers with sniping talent generally had to undergo rigorous training for several years before they could attempt the assessment. Jim, then this Death's Eye replica is mine? David didn't care about the military's Sniper Training Ground Assessment. The only thing he cared about was the ownership of the Death's Eye replica in his hands. David, this Death's Eye replica is yours. I'll help you with the relevant procedures and let you legally own this sniper rifle. Jim said with a bitter smile. Then he continued, you should be concerned about another problem. You have sniping talent. I heard from Myron that you and his university goal is non-university, so you have a high possibility of becoming a Kaji. In other words, you have the possibility of becoming a Kaji sniper in the future. When the people next to him heard the word sniper Kaji, their eyes changed. In a small city like Perrin City, it was rare to see a Kaji sniper. Now that a future Kaji sniper was by their side, it made them feel unreal. Almost every Kaji hoped to have a Kaji sniper as a teammate because it meant more battle results, especially in the wilderness of Monolith. In such a low-intensity Zerg environment, as long as they didn't encounter a group of level 1 Zergs or level 2 Zergs, sniping Kaji snipers could basically guarantee the entire Kaji team's harvest. It didn't cost too much. Even a level 1 bullet used to snipe Kaji could be retrieved after some time. More harvest, less sacrifice. This was the benefit that sniping Kaji could bring to other Kaji. There was also more safety. Sniping Kaji snipers could kill in one shot, which greatly reduced the chances of the Kaji getting injured in battle. David, can I exchange contact numbers with you? Jim asked David as he moved his bracelet closer to him. Of course. David also moved his bracelet closer, and both of them exchanged contact numbers. I'll give you the paperwork and the Death's Eye replica in 3 days at most. You can't take it away now. Jim said with a smile when he saw David looking at the Death's Eye replica from time to time. Jim, sorry to trouble you. I really like this sniper rifle. I won't stand on ceremony with you. David thanked him sincerely. I've opened a membership for you here. You can come and play when you're free. Jim said as he fiddled with his bracelet. David, is there anything you can't do? Myron asked as if he had suffered a heavy blow when he returned. Myron, I just have some talent in learning. As long as you work hard, you can do it too. David comforted him with a smile. Myron rolled his eyes at David. He didn't believe David's words at all. However, Myron didn't dwell on it too much. He soon forgot about it. After all, he was used to it. He began to discuss with David about borrowing the Death's Eye replica in the future. The two of them discussed the distribution of the usage rights of the Death's Eye replica in the car. They laughed and joked all the way back. In the underground shooting city, Jim came to the side and activated his bracelet. "Father, David came to the shooting range today," Jim said to the other side. He could hear that it was First Lieutenant Eaton. "Jim, I owe David's father, Hans, a favor. Do your best to satisfy David's needs." First Lieutenant Eaton's voice was steady and firm. "I promise to give the Death's Eye replica to David." Jim continued, "You must have your reasons for doing this. Tell me." First Lieutenant Eaton didn't blame Jim's decision. He had a clear understanding of his son's character. David passed the military's sniper training field test. Jim first explained the reason for his decision, then went on to explain the whole process of David's test. He did well. David has Hans's connections. As long as he has talent, he won't just be Kaji. I heard that Lord Galen taught David alone for a few days. After that, he was full of praise for David. With Lord Galen's eyesight, I believe David's future is bright. You should communicate with him more. I think Mayor Bernard has the same idea. "Father, what's the problem with the Death's Eye replica?" Jim asked. He didn't have to think about it himself, since he had First Lieutenant Eaton's approval. "Get the City Defense Reserve qualification. I'll let them know," First Lieutenant Eaton said after some thought. Chapter 55. On the morning of the 20th of January, David finished his morning practice and sat in the dining room to have breakfast. His breakfast was now all strength and larva meat. He had to eat 5 portions at a time to barely replenish his energy. He couldn't help but miss the days when he had level 1 strength and meat. At that time, he didn't have to eat until his stomach was full. In these 3 days, David's strength and vitality values hadn't changed. However, he felt his body become more transparent every time he practiced the 18 styles of the body arts. His 3 for spirit made his senses more sensitive. He could feel his body strengthening, but this strengthening wasn't reflected on the status panel. It was a change in the nature of his strength. "I'm here." David heard the doorbell ring when he put a piece of strengthened meat into his mouth. He excitedly swallowed the strengthened meat in his mouth and ran to the door. "Myron, why is it you?" He opened the door and found that it wasn't Jim who he expected. He couldn't help but be disappointed. "David, I'm here to take you out to play. How can you treat me like this?" Myron said unhappily as he walked in. "Myron, why don't you look like you're here to wait for Jim?" David exposed Myron's intentions. The two laughed and sat down. The doorbell rang again. This time, the two jumped up at the same time and looked at each other. David wasn't in a hurry and gestured to Myron. "Jim, you're here." Myron opened the door and greeted with a smile. He then took the weapon box from Jim and said, "I'll carry it for you." "Myron, you're here too," Jim said with a smile as he handed the weapon box to Myron. Myron held the weapon box and didn't reply. His attention was completely attracted by the weapon box. "Jim, please bring it over." As the owner, David couldn't be like Myron. Although he was also passionate about the Death's Eye replica, he still had the self-awareness of the owner. The AI butler, Emma, served the natural fruit juice that had been prepared beforehand. Jim was invited by David to sit on the sofa in the living room. "David, you don't have to be polite with me. I'm a straightforward person. I brought the Death's Eye replica along with 500 bullets," Jim said as he placed another small metal box on the table. David didn't expect Jim to have prepared ammunition. Ammunition for sniper rifles could be purchased, but he could feel Jim's intentions. Among the light firearms, the sniper rifle was considered a controlled weapon. As for the rest of the firearms, as long as one had a legal gun permit, one could legally possess them. Ammunition, on the other hand, was not restricted. Be it local hunters or foreign hunters, they would need to replenish a large amount of ammunition every time they went out. Ammunition supply was one of the most important businesses of Parent City. Since you're not an adult yet, and the Death's Eye replica is a controlled weapon. I've helped you apply for a City Defense Reserve qualification. This way, not only can you legally possess the Death's Eye replica, you can also legally possess other weapons. Jim operated his ID bracelet again, pulled out an authorization document, and sent it to David, saying, "You're right." David opened the authorization document and read it carefully. This authorization document was given to him as David Kerr by the Parent City Defense Brigade. As long as David confirmed this authorization document, he would become David's reserve combat personnel in Parent City. He would be legally able to use individual firearms, including sniper rifles, and the right to purchase the corresponding accessories and ammunition from the military. David's face was a little hesitant. He did not know if this reserve combat personnel would affect his future high school life or even his college entrance exam. David, this reserve combat personnel is only for you to be included in the City Defense Reserve. It won't affect you in any other way. You just have to respond to the call in the event of a major battle. There hasn't been a major battle in Parent City for 20 years now. Jim explained with a smile when he saw David's hesitation. Thank you. David confirmed the authorization document and stored it in David's bracelet. At the same time, his information on Skynet was updated. David, I won't harm you, Jim said with a smile. Jim, why didn't you think of me when there's such a good thing? Myron asked with dissatisfaction as he held the Death's Eye replica. Myron, if you have David's ability, I'll do it for you right away, Jim said as he looked at Myron. It must be known that although Jim was somewhat using his authority in handling this matter, it was in accordance with formal procedures and military discipline. David's sniping ability could be useful during wartime. It was normal for the military to rope in a future Kaji and even snipe Kaji. Although there were many Kaji in Parent City, they were actually divided into 3 groups. The Kaji who served the military were only external and did not participate in Parent City's affairs. The Kaji who served the government were few in number. However, they had to manage a large number of civilian Kaji. Therefore, the government had no choice but to rely on the local civilian Kaji. The third group was the civilian Kaji. There were retired military Kaji who graduated from Kaji Academy and returned to their hometown. There were also a large number of Kaji with complicated identities who came to fight for benefits. Talented young people like David were exactly what the military needed to win over. Even if they did not become part of the military in the future, they still needed to have a good relationship with the military. Jim, you're underestimating me. When I get into Na'an University and become a Kaji, I won't even look at this kind of authorization document, Myron said arrogantly, although he said that he also knew how popular the reserve combat personnel of the City Defense Brigade were. They could legally possess a variety of firearms. This alone was enough to tempt most people. Besides, if there was a war in Parent City, could they hide and avoid it? When that time came, they might as well pick up their weapons and join the battle. The young people of Monolith were never afraid of fighting. The environment they were born in determined that the elites among them would fight the Zergs. Only by joining the battle could they raise their status. David saw Myron's yearning for the reserve combat personnel and understood that it was a good thing. He was even more relieved. David, do you want to go to the shooting range, or do you want me to bring you somewhere else to play? Myron saw that Jim and David had finished their discussion and asked aloud, What can you bring David to play? Jim said to Myron in disdain. He then turned to David and said, Today, I'll bring you to the outside of the city. Let's see the real outside of the city. David's eyes lit up. Although he had seen the scenery outside of Parent City from the city wall, he had only seen it from afar. He had never actually been there. I'll go too. I'll bring this along. Who knows, maybe I can kill a few larvae with my own hands. Myron also excitedly raised the Death's Eye replica in his hand and shouted, Jim, I won't cause you any trouble, right? David also wanted to go, so he asked politely, It's no trouble. We'll just move around within the city's defense area. There won't be any danger. We're not just going with the 3 of us. We'll bring a few more people, Jim said with a smile. David carried the scabbard on his back before he left. Myron loaded the Death's Eye replica and the ammunition box into the car. Jim's car was a military hover car. David and Myron followed in the Gladstone Type 6. They chose the south gate this time. When they arrived at the south gate, David could already see hundreds of people standing there. These people were armed with all kinds of weapons. There were knives, spears, and even firearms. Although the Kaji didn't wear the skeletal armor, they still had some fighting power. Beside them were hover cars loaded with armor that were crooked in a row. David also saw the south gate. It was a square gate that was 10 meters tall and 10 meters wide. The gate was not open at this time. The specially reinforced gate with sharp thorns gave people a fierce aura when they looked at it. The two cars didn't go near the gate. Instead, they parked in a military parking lot not far away. David wanted to help Myron with the Death's Eye replica, but he was rejected. David could see that Myron seemed to have the intention of monopolizing the use of the Death's Eye replica. However, David didn't snatch it from him. Myron didn't have any standard training. After shooting a few times, he wouldn't be able to continue. Jim led the two of them past the hover cars. Although the people waiting were dissatisfied with the three of them not lining up, most of them knew Jim, so their complaints were very soft. Chapter 56. These people are crows. Jim softly introduced them to David. Why are they called crows? David asked, puzzled. They are not real hunters. They only dare to move around the edge of the city, relying on the city's defense to kill larvae. They want to reap the benefits, but they do not want to take risks. They're like scavenging crows. Jim replied with a hint of disdain. David's gaze swept past these people named crows. When he got closer, he realized that there were all kinds of people among them. These people looked back at David with fierce eyes. David, on the other hand, wasn't afraid. From what he could tell, none of these people could give him any pressure. On top of his head, the shadow attendant was observing the surroundings. If any of these people dared to make a move, he would not hesitate to use his rank 2 longsword to show them his power. Of course, there were military heavy machine guns not far from here. It was also very close to the city wall, so no one dared to make a move here. Just as David was walking, a middle-aged man in a tattered military uniform turned around. The cup in his hand spilled all over David's body. Sorry. The middle-aged man did not expect this to happen. He quickly apologized with a smile on his face. Be careful. Jim turned around and said with a frown. Forget it. David patted the water off his body. Because of the cold weather, he was wearing thermal underwear. Only his jacket was wet, so it did not affect him much. However, with his powerful spiritual sense, he could feel that there was some kind of smell in the water. He could not tell what it was. He did not take it to heart. It was just a small matter. Jim came to the gate and used his bracelet to contact the people inside. Following that, a small door beside the steel gate opened, and the three of them walked in. After walking through the small door, David saw a deep steel tunnel. This tunnel ran through the entire city wall, and at the end of the tunnel, they could see the scenery outside the city. This tunnel was the same size as the gate, 10 meters high and 10 meters wide. At the exit of the tunnel, a military heavy armored hover car was already parked there. On top of the heavy armored hover car were 2 heavy machine guns. Jim, come quickly. We're all waiting for you. A young man in a military combat uniform waved his hand and shouted. This is Daly, and this is David. You know Myron. Jim waved his hand and walked over to introduce them. Myron, what are you carrying? Do you know how to use it? Do you need me to teach you? Daly laughed as he patted Myron's shoulder. Daly, I'll show you. Myron shrugged. David, you're too famous. The number of Kaji who died in front of your house is more than the number of Kaji who died in the wild. Daly turned to David and said. The corner of David's mouth twitched. Sure enough, people who played with Jim had similar personalities to Jim. Stop chatting. Let's get out of the city before those crows. Otherwise, they'll annoy us to death. Jim shouted as he jumped onto the heavy armored hover car. David and the others jumped onto the car. David then realized that there were 2 other people in the car. The one in the driver's seat was a serious-looking sergeant. The other person was wearing a white trench coat and long leather boots. He didn't look like he was leaving the city at all. Instead, he looked more like he was attending a cocktail party. This person had shoulder-length hair and a handsome face. If it weren't for the obvious masculine features on his face, David would have thought that this person was a woman. Jim, why is DeQuincy here? Myron immediately asked Jim when he saw this person. Myron, Parent City isn't big to begin with. Leave the official matters to the adults. Let's not have any conflicts between us. Jim said nonchalantly. Myron, let's see who can kill more Zergs if you have the guts. DeQuincy said with a smile. Let's do it. Myron hugged the gun case in his hands tightly and replied with confidence. David didn't say anything. It could be seen that other than the sergeant, these people weren't ordinary people. Their families must have powerful backgrounds. Sergeant Boris, I'll have to trouble you. Let's go. Jim said politely to the sergeant. Yes, Sergeant Boris said in a deep voice. Then, the heavy armored hovercar started. The atmosphere in the car was a little tense because of Myron and DeQuincy. David, there are a lot of Tier 1 medals outside the city. If you can pick up a piece, you can exchange it for a lot of credits. Daly wanted to break the awkward atmosphere. He smiled and said to David, who was the least relevant person, David, don't believe him. In the years after every war, after a search by the military, there would always be some Grade 1 warheads or dead Kaji's Grade 1 weapons that couldn't be recovered. They either went deeper underground or were taken to other places in the bodies of Zergs. It's just that after all these years of searching by the crows, there's nothing left. Jim said with a wave of his hand. Jim thought that David wasn't rich. A Grade 1 medal was too tempting for David. It was very likely that David would do something unexpected. He didn't want anything to happen to David after he brought him out, and Hans and Galen would hold a grudge against him. In fact, although David liked Grade 1 medals, he definitely wouldn't do it for credits. He probably had more credits than anyone else in the car. 40 million credits. Even the big merchants in the city wouldn't be able to take out so many credits at once. Most of the credits in the hands of merchants were for equipment and fixed assets. Only Mr. Stett, who wanted to carry out a big business operation and had the support of an organization, would have so much cash. David doesn't care about Grade 1 medals. Myron interjected. He glanced at David's back as he spoke. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to expose David's Grade 2 longsword, he would have shown it as well. The others didn't pay much attention to Myron's words. However, with this topic, the atmosphere in the car slowly became lively. David looked at the display in the car. The heavy armored hover car didn't have windows. Everything outside was displayed through the display. At this time, the heavy hover car had been driving for 20 minutes. It wasn't going fast, and it wasn't going in a straight line either. Therefore, it wasn't far from Parent City. Sergeant Boris is very experienced. He's looking for the location of Zerg larvae. He can let us see them up close and kill them ourselves. Jim explained softly as he sat beside David. How are the larvae's combat strength? How many larvae have you killed before? David asked curiously. Although the various channels had introduced the larvae, how could they compare to Jim, who had personally fought the larvae and explained it in detail? With a strength of more than 800 in a grade weapon, a person can deal with a larva at close range. If they have firearms, it's not difficult for a normal person to deal with a larva from a distance. In fact, as long as the larvae aren't in large numbers, they won't be a threat to us. I've killed more than 20 larvae. Jim replied after thinking for a while. David nodded. He had a better understanding of the combat power of Grade 1 Zergs. Larvae were limited. Now that he heard Jim's words, he knew that larvae wouldn't be a threat to him. Jim, the soil here is different. There should be larvae. Sergeant Boris said in a deep voice. David looked at the display. He couldn't see anything different on the ground in front of him. However, Sergeant Boris must have some basis for saying so. Bring your weapons and get out of the car, Jim said loudly. Myron had already opened his weapon box and installed the Death's Eye replica. At the same time, he filled it with 50 bullets and stood up with his weapon in hand. Good Lord, this is a Death's Eye replica. No wonder you agreed to DeQuincy's competition. Daly couldn't help but cry out. He didn't expect Myron to be carrying such a weapon. DeQuincy's expression wasn't good either. He had only brought a D-15 shotgun this time. It was a powerful medium to short-range firearm for individual use. It had 15 bullets. Normally, it would be enough to use in a situation like this. However, he didn't expect Myron to be carrying a long-range sniper rifle, and such a powerful one at that. This way, as long as the larvae were within sight, they wouldn't be able to escape the death's eye replica. Chapter 57. Jim took out a D200 assault rifle, and Daly did the same. Their choice was to maintain their firepower while maintaining the maximum lethality, so they didn't choose anything too special. "David, do you want a spare gun?" Jim asked when he saw David's death's eye replica in Myron's hands. "No need, Jim. I have this." David smiled and patted the scabbard on his back. "David, we're not Kaji. Although cold weapons sound powerful, it depends on who's using them." Although De Quincey wasn't very friendly to David because of his close relationship with David, he didn't have any ill intentions. "Don't worry, David is a genius," Myron turned around and said. Jim immediately stopped talking. The last time Myron said this, he saw David use the Death's Eye replica to pass the military's sniper training field assessment. Seeing that Jim didn't say anything, the others didn't try to persuade him either. After all, the weapons in their hands were enough to deal with any trouble they encountered. Sergeant Boris stayed behind in the heavy, armored hover car. The 2 heavy machine guns on the car were his weapons. After jumping off the car, David smelled a faint, fishy smell. Myron found a protruding boulder and set up the Death's Eye replica. He began to search for his target. "Daly, you're in charge of the left. De Quincey, you're in charge of the right. David, you watch the rear. Call if anything happens. I'll lead the way." Jim ordered with the D200 assault rifle in hand. "Jim, what about me?" Myron couldn't help but call out when he didn't hear his orders. "Don't leave your current position. Sergeant Boris can protect you in the armored vehicle. The sniper rifle in your hand can also attack the larvae within 2 kilometers. If you're not satisfied, you can go to the vehicle and change into a mid-range weapon and follow us," Jim said helplessly. In any case, they wouldn't be more than 2 kilometers away from the heavy armored hover car. In fact, Myron was the safest among them. He was on a huge rock, and his surroundings were covered by Sergeant Boris's 2 heavy machine guns. "Then go. I'll protect you." Myron was very satisfied with this arrangement. "Myron, don't aim 10 meters away from me. I'm worried about your marksmanship." David reminded Myron of his marksmanship. Myron's marksmanship had been practiced in the windless environment of the shooting range. In such an environment, no one could say for sure how accurate he could be. "Myron, don't shoot in our direction." Jim also remembered that Myron wasn't a veteran, so he quickly reminded him. Even De Quincey couldn't help but shrink his neck when he saw the Death's Eye replica in Myron's hand. He wondered if Myron would use some unreliable marksmanship to blow his head off. Under the repeated warnings of the others, Myron promised that he wouldn't shoot indiscriminately. Only then did the chaos that had occurred before the operation had even begun. Put your identity bracelets into the 988 communication channel. Maintain communication. Although it was just a trip without any danger, Jim still strictly followed the rules and requested everything. 10 meters above David's head, the shadow attendant had already begun to observe the surroundings. At this height, everything within a few hundred meters could be seen. The shadow attendant's vision was especially clear. As long as it was within sight, David could see every detail through the shadow attendant. He was certain that aside from the insectoids hiding behind the rock, no insectoids could escape the shadow attendant's eyes. The team of 4 moved forward, with David at the back. "Jim, why aren't the city defenses attacking the larvae?" David looked at the distance from Parent City. He was certain that they were still within the city's range. However, if there were larvae here, why wouldn't the city defenses intervene? The city defenses are only responsible for the level 1 insectoids in the line of defense. The larvae are normally left to the hunters or ravens. On one hand, the hunters or ravens need income. On the other hand, if the city defenses use weapons to attack the larvae, it would consume too much energy every day. Of course, if there's an abnormal number of larvae, the city defense team will also come out of the city to encircle them. If that doesn't work, the interceptor drones will bombard them. Jim explained as they walked. David had long heard that the larvae couldn't be exterminated. This had to do with the insectoid's reproduction method. A large number of larvae lay dormant underground, and they would choose not to evolve when there was sufficient energy. Instead, they would split into more larvae and recoup their energy. Under such circumstances, the larvae couldn't be exterminated at all. Fortunately, the monolith planet was desolate, and there wasn't much energy to replenish. Therefore, the larvae could only evolve into level 1 insectoids at most, and the chances of evolving into level 2 insectoids were very low. The most important thing was the constant extermination and energy depletion. On the other planets closer to Warstar, the threat posed by level 2 insectoids and higher-level insectoids forced the Interstellar Federation to invest more combat power in those planets. At this time, the shadow attendant saw a sharp head poking out from behind a rock 20 meters in front of them. He was about to warn them when he heard the sound of Jim's D-200 assault rifle. Continuous shots were fired, accurately hitting the head. After a shrill cry, a pool of green blood flowed out and spread out around the rock. I'm so lucky." Jim laughed as he rushed forward. Although he was happy, he still aimed at the larvae's head and fired 3 consecutive shots. He only stopped when he was sure that the larvae was dead. Just as the larvae fell, the shadow attendant that was 10 meters above David's head took the initiative to fly forward. He stopped 10 meters in front of David and took a deep breath. Then, through the shadow attendant's senses, David felt a surge of energy being absorbed into his body. However, this energy was extremely weak, far from the comfortable feeling he felt when he absorbed human souls. "David, come take a look. I'll teach you how to decompose a larvae." Jim called out to David, who was still standing in place. "Coming." David withdrew part of his senses from the shadow attendant's body and quickly walked toward Jim. Behind the rock, he saw a complete insectoid larva. This larva was slightly smaller than an adult human. Its entire body was covered in a thin layer of insect shell. Its body was curved, and it had 8 pairs of slender legs. 2 of them were especially long and had sharp thorns. Its gray appearance was easy to overlook in this environment. "David, the first cut is to cut the larva's brain nerves." Jim took out a dagger from beside his leg and stabbed it into the gap between the insect shell on the larva's back. No matter what, remember that insectoids are a race with strong vitality. Even if it's a dead insectoid, don't let your guard down. Our fragile bodies will make us pay a huge price if we make a single mistake. Jim continued. David nodded. He carefully watched Jim's movements. As Jim explained, the insect shell that seemed to be tightly sealed was easily removed with a few cuts. After the shell was removed, 2 strips of enhanced meat that were completely different from the others were revealed. Jim used the dagger in his hand to make a cut on each side of the enhanced meat, and then used his hands to take out the 2 strips of enhanced meat. "David, do you have the guts to eat it now? Only the strengthened meat taken out on the spot has the best effect," Jim said to David with a smile, while holding the 2 strips of strengthened meat. David took the strengthened meat and looked at the sticky body fluids of the larva on it. He could not help but feel anxious. However, he knew that he had to pass this hurdle. He had heard that many Kaji leveled up as they fought because they had the freshest strengthened meat. He closed his eyes and put the strengthened meat into his mouth. The long strengthened meat was not processed. It was not divided into portions like when he bought it, where each portion was cut into just the right size to eat. The strength of almost 1,000 kilograms made his teeth extremely strong. The original strengthened meat was not as bad as he imagined. It tasted the same as the strengthened meat that was processed at home. There was also a hint of sweetness in it. However, he quickly realized that the sweetness was most likely the larva's body fluids. He suppressed the churning in his stomach and increased his speed. "Good." Jim, Daly, and De Quincey cheered loudly when they saw David eat the 2 strips of strengthened meat. They had all experienced this before, so they knew how it felt to eat strengthened meat for the first time. Everyone here had vomited at least once. Chapter 58. Boom! A gunshot came from afar, followed by Myron's proud voice from the 988 communication channel. I hit a larva. You guys can go 200 meters to your right and deal with it when you're free. 200 meters? Jim looked at the direction 200 meters to his right and then looked at Daly. Both of them looked at each other in confusion. Sergeant Boris, turn on the car's scanner and scan for life fields nearby. Jim said to Sergeant Boris through the 988 communication channel. Yes, sir, Sergeant Boris replied. Then, the unique sound of the scanner came from the communication channel. Stay alert, Jim said with a hand gesture. David didn't understand what was going on, so he looked at Daly with a questioning gaze. We're within the city's defense area, and the crows clean the area every day. Normally, it's hard to find a single larva without searching for it. But now we found 2 larvae. Something's not right, Daly explained while staying alert. Sir, there are no other live fields other than yours, Sergeant Boris reported. Let's be more careful. If anything goes wrong, return to the car immediately, Jim said in a low voice. He didn't relax even after hearing the report. David, the insectoid larvae might move underground. Although it's slower, the scanner won't be able to detect their life signature. Daly explained to David again. They didn't care about the larva's carcass. They weren't crows, and the larva's carcass was worthless. It wasn't worth their time. Jim was still leading the team as they moved slowly to the right. David realized that Jim was definitely a good leader. He was meticulous and not impulsive. Their safety was the most important thing. It took them 3 minutes to reach 200 meters. On the larva's carcass, there was a large hole in its chest that went through its back. Myron, what kind of marksmanship is that? You destroyed the strengthened meat, Jim yelled at his ID bracelet. Isn't there still a part of the strengthened meat? David pointed at the larva's back and asked. Indeed, the huge wound on the back of the larva had penetrated a small portion of the strengthened flesh, but most of the strengthened flesh was still intact. The flesh and organs of the larvae are poisonous, so as long as the strengthened meat is contaminated with the rest of the larvae's flesh and organs, it can no longer be eaten. Jim pointed at the wound and said. At this time, David also discovered that after 2 minutes, the shadow servant beside the larva's corpse didn't have any reaction. In other words, the larva's soul had already dissipated after 2 minutes. This result made David a little disappointed. The strengthened meat was everyone's spoils of war, but the larva's soul was something that was unique to him. Myron, it's such a waste for you to use that Death's Eye replica. De Quincey mocked. De Quincey, I killed at least 1 larva. How about you? Myron didn't hold back and replied. Stop. Make sure the communication channel is clean. Jim had a headache and stopped the two from escalating their quarrel. While they were talking, the larva on the ground suddenly moved. Almost instantly, Daly and Jim fired their D-200 assault rifles at the same time. The green flesh of the larva was blown away by the continuous barrage of bullets. At the same time, David also saw that the larva's head had just poked out from under the carcass. Its head had already been blasted into pieces by multiple bullets. Are these bugs crazy? Jim cursed. He didn't like accidents. But since there were spoils of war, collecting them was his priority. If there were no spoils of war, how could he gather people to kill the larvae? Even though there was a heavy armor hover car and a professional soldier accompanying them, these were all requested from the military. There was a fee for such services. Even though Jim often used his identity as First Lieutenant Eaton to do things, all his actions were carried out under the conditions that didn't violate military discipline. Without spoils of war, they wouldn't even be able to pay for Sergeant Boris's salary, let alone the rental of the heavy armored hover car. Daly, De Quincey, you two dig with me. David, stay on guard, Jim ordered. Then, the 3 of them took out their daggers and began to dig out the larva's carcass. David carefully observed his surroundings. He no longer entrusted his safety to the shadow attendant. The shadow attendant wouldn't be able to detect the danger from underground in time. Clean up this larva's strengthened flesh. We'll return to the car immediately, Jim said while digging. I don't think something's right. Did someone set us up? Daly's eyes flashed coldly. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation. It was very unusual. Who's trying to set us up? I'll let them know how powerful I am. It's a pity that my clothes are gone, De Quincey said while digging. His white windbreaker was smeared with mud, but David also noticed that De Quincey didn't really care about his appearance. When he was needed, he didn't even care about his clothes. Everything he did was according to Jim's orders. Who told you to wear such white when you knew we were going out of the city? Myron said through the communication channel. This time, De Quincey didn't reply because he was digging with all his might. The three of them worked together and soon dug out the larva's carcass. Jim wiped his dagger twice on his body and quickly dissected the larva's carcass. This time, he didn't slow down in order to demonstrate to David. In less than a minute, he had already taken out 2 strips of strengthened flesh. He put the 2 strips of strengthened flesh into a bag prepared beforehand, put away his dagger, and picked up the D200 assault rifle again. Follow the formation just now. We'll return immediately, he said in a deep voice as he gestured. The other 3 didn't say anything. They quickly followed the formation and began to move back. After taking 2 steps, David saw the mud under De Quincey's feet move and hurriedly pulled him away. Just as De Quincey's legs were pulled away by David, 2 sharp spikes shot out from the ground and pierced the air. Sergeant Boris, come and get us. Jim yelled into his ID bracelet. The D200 assault rifle in his hand rang out as he fired at the target underground. At the same time, Daly and De Quincey also began to attack. Green blood seeped out from the ground. This time, no one mentioned digging out the carcass. Even David, who wasn't familiar with the wilderness, noticed that something was wrong. Roger, Sergeant Boris's voice came. This made Jim feel relieved. Sergeant Boris could cover this distance in 30 seconds. Once they boarded the heavy armor hovercar, they would be safe. Back to back. Pay attention to your feet. Jim ordered again. The shadow attendant had just absorbed a ball of weak energy. Under David's control, it entered the ground. However, David was disappointed. Although the shadow attendant could use its ability to move through the ground, it couldn't see the situation underground. In the shadow attendant's eyes, there was only mud. David had no choice but to let the shadow attendant return to the surface. At least this way, it could see if there were any larvae approaching. Although he was controlling the shadow attendant, he could still feel the mud under his feet trembling. He, who had experienced countless battles in the illusion, instinctively tapped the ground and his body rose into the air. Before he could make his next move, the guns in the other 3's hands rang out at the same time. They fired at the larvae that had just revealed a part of its leg. Green blood gushed out from the ground again. This time, David noticed it in time. The rest of the team focused their attacks on the larvae. The larvae's head was only a thin layer of mud above the ground before it exploded. I still have 10 bullets. What about you guys? Jim looked at the D200 assault rifle's display and asked in a deep voice. He didn't expect to run out of ammo. The D200 assault rifle had 200 bullets at full capacity. It was enough to deal with normal situations. In addition, the heavy armored hovercar was nearby and could be replenished at any time. He didn't bring any spare ammo. I still have 2 more. Daly, who was even more aggressive than him, said helplessly, I'm out of ammo. De Quincey said embarrassedly. His D15 shotgun only had 15 bullets in total. He had used them all up because he was nervous. In the distance, the heavy armored hovercar had already started moving. Due to the car's weight, it needed time to start up. Of course, the 2 heavy machine guns could also provide support, but the problem was that Sergeant Boris was underground. Chapter 59. Let's hope Sergeant Boris is faster. Jim gripped the D200 assault rifle in his hand and said in a deep voice, even though he was a veteran, he wasn't a real professional soldier or a professional hunter. Every time he went out of the city, it was more for fun and training. It was for this reason that he and his companions didn't pay attention to their ammunition consumption. If they were lucky, they could still kill a larva. Just as he was speaking, the ground suddenly started to tremble, making them lose their footing. At the same time, the soil under their feet started to churn. David once again felt the abnormality under his feet. He reached his hand behind his back, and two long swords that were shining with a faint blue light jumped into his hands. The two spikes that had just emerged from the soil hadn't even touched David's feet before they were cut in half by two blue flashes of light. The larva's ear-piercing screech came from the soil. Then, a larva rushed out from the soil. The pair of dark eyes on its ugly head stared at David, who had injured it. However, its stare didn't last for half a second. David's rank two long swords sliced open its head, revealing the green tissue inside. After David dealt with his own problem, he heard a miserable cry. David looked over. De Quincey was using one hand to block the D-15 shotgun in front of him. The D-15 shotgun had been pierced by a spike. Even though he had blocked one spike, the other spike had pierced his thigh. The red blood on his white windbreaker was particularly glaring. At this moment, the spike was being pulled back from his thigh, preparing for a second attack. David exerted force on his feet. The sword mastery he had practiced for some time came into effect. His body was agile and quick. He rushed to De Quincey's side like a gust of wind. He swept his sword across the larva's head and used the other to cut off the spike that had just been pulled out of De Quincey's thigh. De Quincey, who had suffered a second blow, grunted once more. His hands were powerless, and the spike on the D-15 shotgun suddenly pierced towards his face. The spikes stopped less than 10 centimeters away from his face. De Quincey endured the pain and saw David holding two swords. The head of the larva attacking him had been cut open. Before De Quincey could express his gratitude, David's figure flashed again. Just a moment ago, the four of them were attacked at the same time. However, after Jim used up all the bullets in his D-200 assault rifle, he heavily injured the larva that had just appeared. Then he used the D-200 assault rifle as a cold weapon to help Daly deal with the larva on the other side. Without ammunition, the two D-200 assault rifles could only be used as sticks. This caused them to be battered by the two spikes of the larvae in just a few seconds. They could be injured at any time. David arrived just in time. With a sweep of his rank two long sword, the larva's head was cut open. Green blood flowed out as the larva fell to the ground. In truth, although the short battle seemed dangerous, David did not feel any danger at all. To him, the larvae were more like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. The rank 2 longsword in his hand could easily cut open the outer shell of a rank 1 arachnid, so the larva's thin shell was as good as defenseless. More importantly, the larva's attack style was too simple. It completely relied on its 2 spikes to attack. This kind of attack was indeed very threatening to ordinary people, but as long as one had a weapon of the same grade, the larva's damage after its spikes were cut off was almost negligible. David did not stop. He also killed the larva that Jim had heavily injured with his last bullet. The shadow attendant did not even need to be controlled. It continuously absorbed the souls of the 4 larvae. David, thank you. Jim looked at the D-200 assault rifle that had been destroyed by the larva's spikes and thanked him sincerely. Just a moment ago, he felt the threat of death. Fighting the larvae without a weapon, even if he had more than 800 kilograms of strength, he would not be able to hold on for long. The larva's 2 spikes were too fast. The D-200 assault rifle in his hand was pierced continuously in a short period of time. De Quincey is injured. He needs medical attention. David did not put away the 2 rank 2 longswords. Instead, he looked around and reminded De Quincey. De Quincey, hang in there. There's a first aid kit in the car. Daly comforted De Quincey. They were all traveling lightly and did not bring any necessary supplies. Naturally, they would not bring a first aid kit. Jim, the situation on your side is not right. Be careful. Myron shouted in the communication channel. David split a bit of his consciousness to connect with the shadow attendant. The shadow attendant flew into the air and saw that the ground in a 20-meter radius around them was trembling slightly. In the distance, Sergeant Boris was rushing over in a heavy armored hover car. David judged that even if Sergeant Boris came, it was too late. The larvae seemed to have gone crazy and had already surrounded them. Jim, Daly, help De Quincey stand on the rock. I'll take care of the rest. David said as he pointed at a large rock with his rank 2 longsword. Jim and Daly did not hesitate. David's performance had already convinced them. In addition, they did not have any weapons. The best way was to not cause any trouble for David. They helped a Quincy stand on the rock. At the same time, the dust on the ground rolled and the entire ground seemed to have collapsed. The dust raised made the ground look like it was covered in fog. "David!" Jim shouted. David was currently covered in dust. Jim was very nervous. With 80% master level of longsword mastery and 2 level 2 longswords shining with a faint blue light, although David was not a soldier, his attack power was definitely not weaker than a soldier without armor. The sudden flying gray tip affected his vision, but he did not panic. He had experienced too many battles in the illusion, so he could still maintain a calm state of mind in this situation. He squinted to prevent the dust from entering his eyes. He retracted the rank 2 longsword in his left hand and placed it in front of him. The rank 2 longsword in his right hand formed a second layer of protection in front of him. He did not understand how the Zerg could see, but the fact that they could attack from underground meant that the larvae did not rely solely on their vision. Sure enough, he heard 4 whooshing sounds coming from the front and left of his body. Instinctively, he swung the level 2 longsword in his right hand. Then he took 3 steps forward and stabbed with the level 2 longsword in his left hand. More than half of the dust slowly settled, and the surroundings were no longer completely obscured. The 3 people on the rock saw more than 20 larvae. They ignored the 3 people on the rock and rushed towards David in a frenzy. In the short period of time when the dust covered, the 4 larvae that attacked David were all injured to varying degrees, but David was not injured at all. When he saw more than 20 larvae surrounding him, David felt his blood boiling, but at the same time, his heart was extremely calm. His body turned into a gust of wind, and the 2 rank 2 longswords were like lightning in the wind. The blue light kept flashing in the wind, and every time it flashed, it would bring out a stream of green blood. David did not control the first 2 swords well when he attacked, so the larvae's head and body were cut in half by the sharp rank 2 longsword. However, his clear mind recalled what Jim had said before. The strengthened flesh of the larvae could not be contaminated by the flesh of other larvae. In the next attack, he changed his attacking style. Other than cutting the larvae's spikes, the rank 2 longsword would only cut the larvae's head. In the dust that had not completely dispersed, David's figure appeared and disappeared. Every attack was accompanied by the larvae's ear-piercing screams, and from time to time, the larvae's spikes would fly out. David's swordsmanship is so good. The Quincy, who had been enduring the pain, had forgotten about it. He muttered in disbelief. He's at least an expert in swordsmanship. None of the Kaji I've seen can compare to David. Jim exclaimed. He had the right to speak in this aspect. Although there were not many Kaji in Parent City's City Defense Brigade, and there were no Kaji who used swords, there were often Kaji exchanges in the army. De Quincy had used his connections to meet many powerful Kaji. Chapter 60. Sword Kaji was one of the rarest Kaji among the Kaji because swords were light weapons. It was difficult to kill an insectoid with a single blow. Hence, unless one was at the peak of Kaji, no Kaji would use a sword as a weapon. However, a normal Kaji would not give up on a weapon that he had always used after reaching the subversive stage. Instead, he would study sword mastery all over again. It would waste a lot of time and energy. Only mercenary Commander Froman, who had reached the peak of Kaji at a very young age, would choose to accumulate wealth by any means necessary to increase his strength. He would not fight insectoids, but rather it would be more convenient for him to fight Kaji. Hence, he would study sword mastery. David, who had received Commander Froman's sword mastery glowing ball of knowledge, had naturally obtained all of his proficiency in sword mastery. He really is a genius. Daly swallowed his saliva and said with a dry voice. Previously, when Myron said that David was a genius, he did not take it seriously. Although he was not able to become a Kaji, he was stronger than most ordinary people. He was the same as Jim. He did not have the ability to enter university as a Kaji, but he did not want to give up. He used his family's connections to continuously train himself. He wanted to become a Kaji through continuous training. Although this path was many times harder than becoming a Kaji during university, there were many examples in the military that encouraged them. However, today he felt the gap between him and a true genius for the first time. It was like the gap between heaven and earth. The three of them did not mention that David was so powerful because of his rank 2 sword. Surrounded by more than 20 larvae, if he did not have a strong sword mastery, he would have been pierced by those sharp spikes that they could not see clearly. Even if any of the three of them had a rank 2 sword, they would not be able to defend against so many larvae. The battle turned into a massacre. David felt the thrill of battle. Compared to the illusion that was separated by a layer of gauze, the real battle made him feel comfortable and his strength was released to the greatest extent. Even in battle, due to the fact that the larvae were too weak, the long sword in his hand used a variety of cold weapon techniques. Fortunately, Jim, Daly, and DeQuincy weren't the real Kaji and couldn't see David's movements clearly. Otherwise, they would have noticed David's unique fighting style. The killing intent that he had been suppressing was also released in the endless slaughter, causing his 2 swords to become even sharper. By the time the heavy armor hovercar arrived beside them, the battle had already ended. Other than the boulder where Jim and the other 2 were standing, everything within 10 meters of them was dyed green by the blood of the larvae. The smell of blood mixed with the stench of the larvae. David regained his focus from the battle. He looked at the larvae corpses all over the ground in disbelief. Before he came to this world, he was still an ordinary person. However, in less than a month after he came to this world, he could face a large number of larvae without feeling any discomfort. This was different from the day he killed Mr. Stett with a sniper rifle. This was close combat. Although he wasn't facing a human, it was still much bloodier. He sensed the shadow attendant in the sky. Everything was because of the shadow attendant. Collecting his thoughts, David looked at the 2 swords in his hands. The 2 swords glowing with a faint blue light were not stained with the green blood of the larvae. He didn't need to wipe them off. He lightly sheathed them back into the scabbards on his back. "Jim, I'm late." Sergeant Boris apologized as he jumped out of the heavy armored hovercar with a first aid kit. Originally, it was his responsibility to protect the safety of these people. However, the larvae's unexpected attack from underground made his heavy machine gun useless. Even when more than 20 larvae rushed out of the ground, due to the dust, he didn't dare to fire the machine gun carelessly for fear of accidentally injuring others. "Quick, treat DeQuincy's wound." Jim didn't say anything else. Instead, he shouted anxiously. Sergeant Boris tied a tourniquet around the punctured wound and injected a tube of medicinal liquid into DeQuincy's body. "I've injected DeQuincy with a disinfectant needle. The poison on the larvae's spikes won't affect him much in the short term. However, I can only stop the pain and bleeding from his wound. We'll have to send him back to treat it." Sergeant Boris was very fast. He finished the operation in less than a minute. "I'm fine. We've gained quite a lot this time. Hurry up and pack up the spoils. I can still hold on." DeQuincy, who had taken the medicine, said with a forced smile. At this time, the heavy armored hovercar was right next to them. They could replenish their ammunition at any time. In addition to the fierce firepower of the 2 heavy machine guns, there was no need to worry about safety. Of course, the most reassuring thing was that David was there. In a sudden situation, David could easily kill all 20 larvae. Sergeant Boris helped DeQuincy into the car first. "David, please keep watch. Daly and I will pack up." Jim didn't refuse. There were rules outside, and they had to take back their spoils of war. DeQuincy was injured. The credits for the treatment should be covered by the spoils of this operation, as well as the expenses for the damaged guns and so on. The prerequisite was safety. Now that safety was guaranteed, of course they had to recoup their costs. 2 daggers in Jim and Daly's hands quickly cut up the larvae's carcasses, and strips of strengthened meat were put into their pockets. Perhaps because David had killed all the larvae in the area, or perhaps because David's massacre had frightened the larvae, not a single larvae appeared until they were done collecting their spoils of war. Just as they were about to get into the car, they saw Myron carrying the replica of Death's Eye running over in large strides. Myron, why didn't you wait here? Why did you come directly? Don't you know it's dangerous? Jim shouted with a glare. Jim, I didn't see a single larvae within a 2-kilometer radius today. Myron didn't mind and explained. Let's talk in the car. Jim immediately waved his hand and said. In fact, they hadn't been out for long this time, only about 10 minutes. When they returned to the south gate, a group of crows was driving out of the south gate. After entering the city walls, the group that hadn't spoken on the way let out a long sigh of relief. Something's wrong today. Jim didn't wait for them to get out of the car and said in a deep voice, Sergeant Boris, have you seen larvae behaving like this before? Daly turned to Sergeant Boris in the driver's seat and asked. No, Sergeant Boris replied with certainty. I don't know if you noticed, but after we separated from David, those larvae didn't attack us anymore. Instead, they all rushed towards David. De Quincey's wounds that had been treated didn't hurt as much anymore. He began to think and analyze. Yes, I was worried that the larvae would rush towards the rocks, but they didn't care about the 3 of us. Daly nodded in agreement. They all looked at David. Everyone looked at David's coat and thought of what happened before they left the city. There's something wrong with the water that splashed on David, Jim said in a deep voice. Find him. How dare he do this in front of us? Daly's eyes flashed coldly as he said sternly, Sergeant Boris, take De Quincey to the military doctor first. We'll check the surveillance and find the bastard who did this to us. Jim ordered Sergeant Boris. Jim, Myron, David, and Daly jumped out of the car. Sergeant Boris drove De Quincey away first. Jim called over a soldier and handed him 2 bags. He didn't need to worry about dealing with the strengthened meat. The army had its own purchasing point. After paying the rental fee, the rest of the credits will be transferred to Jim's account. David, this is almost all your spoils of war. However, you'll need to deduct some of the travel expenses and De Quincey's treatment fee before you can give me the rest. Jim explained after the soldier left, afraid that David would misunderstand. David nodded. Although he preferred fresh strengthened meat, he knew that everything had to be done according to the rules. Fresh strengthened meat was better than processed strengthened meat. However, he couldn't use so much fresh strengthened meat all at once. The effect would still be lost, so David didn't care too much about it. Jim saw that David had agreed and was very satisfied with David's attitude. He was strong, but not arrogant. He was a worthy friend. Chapter 61. That's him. Jim brought the 3 of them to the South Gate surveillance room and found the crows pouring water on David's body. Help me find out who he is. Jim turned to the soldier beside him and asked. The crows had to be registered every day when they came in and out of this place. On one hand, it was easier to manage, and on the other hand, if someone died without a complete corpse, they would know who died. Although it was heartless to say this, it was the truth. Crows were less dangerous than hunters because they were not as strong as hunters. Most hunters were Kaji, and Kaji could reduce the casualties of normal hunters when facing the insectoids. The larvae near the city wall were not easy to deal with, and it was impossible to guard against underground attacks. The death rate of crows was also very high. Found it. This person is Lovell the venomous snake. Here's his information. The soldier quickly found the results. David, wait a minute. I'll ask my father for some people. Jim gestured to David and the others. He then walked to the side and opened his bracelet to contact Lieutenant Eden. Jim likes to do things in a way that no one can find fault with. The military is very complicated. He doesn't dare to make mistakes. Daly explained to David softly. I understand. David nodded. They did not have law enforcement authority. Even if they found Lovell, there was nothing they could do. On one hand, there was no evidence. On the other hand, they could not force Lovell to talk. 5 minutes later, Jim brought the 3 of them onto a military transport hoverplane. They saw a group of soldiers and 2 military police Kaji in white exoskeleton armor. David recognized them. They were the 2 military police Kaji on the city wall. David, please give me your coat. One of the military police Kaji said in a deep voice. David took off the scabbard on his back and took off his coat. The military police Kaji took out a device and began to examine it. Soon, a set of data flashed on the device. Everyone, Jim, Daly, De Quincy, David, and the others were attacked by the larvae. It has been determined that Sergeant Boris, the combat reserve David, and many other people closely related to the military are involved. Therefore, this case has been determined as a military case and will be handled by the military police. Please cooperate if necessary. The military police Kaji said in a deep voice. Of course, Jim replied on behalf of everyone. He then asked, "What is the liquid on David's coat?" Not only Jim, but the others were also very curious. This thing was too powerful. A little liquid was enough to make all the larvae go crazy. That's the brain fluid of the brainworm bewitching. When the military police Kaji said this result, he couldn't help but look at David. The brainworm bewitching was a level 2 insectoid, and it was the most special existence among them. Although it didn't have strong physical attack power, it had terrifying mental attack power. At the same time, it could bewitch life forms with weak willpower, including humans. On the battlefield, the damage of a brainworm bewitching was beyond imagination. Not to mention the almost undetectable mental attack. Just its bewitching ability could make the comrades beside it suddenly change their aim and point their guns at them. The brain fluid of the brainworm bewitching was a high-grade material. Attracting larvae was one of the most wasteful effects, but someone used this high-grade material to target a student like David. The military police Kaji's face tensed up when he thought about the people behind David and the title of Nation Knight of his father, Hans. He quickly entered his judgment into the identity bracelet on his hand. This is a contempt to the title of Nation Knight and a provocation to the dignity of the military. Especially after killing a group of mercenaries Kaji, this kind of thing still happened. The situation is even worse. Level 2 insectoid, brainworm bewitching. Jim and Daly gasped at the same time. David had already guessed in his heart that this was the work of the organization, but he didn't expect that they would find an opportunity when he just went out of the city and set up this trap to target him. It was obvious that the other party had misjudged his strength, so they didn't succeed. It's time to get rid of Trainer Jeremy. David instantly made a decision in his heart. Although the killing intent was released because of the massacre outside the city, it was also converted from the killing intent obtained from the illusion into a real killing intent. Therefore, David was more decisive than before. When he felt the danger, the first thing he thought of was to get rid of it directly. Now he was confident that as long as the opponent didn't use exoskeleton armor, he would dare to fight face to face. This was the confidence he gained after fighting more than 20 larvae head-on. "We're here," one of the military police Kaji said in a deep voice. The hatch at the back of the military transport hover aircraft instantly opened. 2 military police officers led the way, and 8 soldiers wearing heavy bulletproof vests and bulletproof helmets and armed with T8-type laser guns jumped down. Only the military was equipped with laser guns. On one hand, it was strictly controlled, and on the other hand, its lethality against the insectoids was too low, so it was difficult for it to become popular. However, because of its fast-firing speed and accuracy, it was used by the military in large numbers when dealing with internal affairs of the Federation. The laser beam from a laser gun was only lethal at a certain distance, so this weapon would not cause too much accidental damage in a crowded place. At the same time, because it used krypton as energy, there's almost no need to worry about the problem of the laser's energy supply. Jim and Daly jumped down next. This was the first time David and Myron had experienced such a scene. 2 Kaji leading a team of soldiers to carry out a mission. Just thinking about it made them excited. The military is moving. Everyone stay where you are. Any movement will be regarded as resistance. The military has the right to shoot on the spot. The military police Kaji exoskeleton armor warned through the loudspeaker. In front of the densely packed houses, there was chaos for a while, but it immediately became eerily quiet. Then, 2 white figures jumped over several buildings, directly opened a hole in the roof of one of the houses, and rushed into the house. There was no fighting, no resistance. In just 5 seconds, the two military police Kaji carried an unconscious person back. "Why did you take Lovell away?" A voice sounded, and then a man in a tattered military uniform with a heavy machine gun rushed out of the house. "Your actions have violated the military management agreement. It has been recorded." The military police Kaji, who did not carry anyone, said emotionlessly through the loudspeaker. Just when David thought it was a warning, the 8 soldiers fired their T8 laser guns at the same time. 8 laser beams accurately hit the man with the heavy machine gun. It was clear that the man's body, including the machine gun in his hand, had melted to varying degrees. "Let's go back." Jim gently pushed David and reminded him. "Jim, don't we need to go to trial?" David was still shocked by the scene in front of him. He had heard of the military's tyranny, but he had never thought it would be this tyrannical. He had studied this world. In this world, the laws were extremely sound. The rights of citizens increased according to their authority, but the right to life was a basic right that all citizens had. "David, the entire monolith planet is within the scope of the war zone. Any resistance against the military, as long as there is clear evidence, the military will fight back fiercely in order to maintain its deterrence," Jim replied softly. David remembered that after the military police Kaji issued the warning, the residents who wanted to cause a commotion immediately quieted down. Perhaps only the man who had a good relationship with Lovell would jump out to ask for the reason, but he did not expect to lose his life. However, as long as they remembered that this was a gathering place for crows, and some of the crows even had weapons, the military's deterrence was still very necessary. "Jim, David, Myron, take a look. Was this man the one who bumped into David and splashed water on David?" The military police Kaji brought the unconscious man in front of them and confirmed. "That's him." The 3 people who were present at the scene confirmed with certainty. "Then there's nothing else for you to do. I'll inform you when there's a result," the military police Kaji said expressionlessly. Then, he did not pay attention to them and directly jumped into the military transport hovercraft and left. P.S. Melon Seeds, please give me your recommendation votes. Melon Seeds, thank you very much. Chapter 62. Jim, they just left us like that. Myron looked at Jim with some surprise and asked in disbelief. "What can I do? This is how the military police do things. Even my father can't do anything to them." Jim said with a bitter smile. "Don't say too much. Let's leave quickly." Daly looked around and reminded. Fortunately, the man with the heavy machine gun was shot dead. It was a great deterrent to the people here, so no one came looking for trouble. However, this was the most chaotic place in the city. They didn't want to stay here for too long. After hailing a public transport hovercar, they finally left the crows' gathering area under the angry gazes of many. "David, I won't say anything else. You saved us today. I'll remember it in my heart. If you need anything in the future, just call me," Daly said to David as he was leaving. Jim didn't say anything else. He kept the words of gratitude in his heart. He just wanted to go back and ask his father to pay more attention to this case and find the person who wanted to kill David. As for the fact that they were implicated by David, no one mentioned it. They only saw David's selfless help during the accident, so they didn't need to care about the cause of the incident. "David, I'll put the gun here." Myron put the Death's Eye replica on the side of the hall and then said, "It's a pity that I didn't go on an adventure with you guys today. Myron, it wasn't a good experience. Look at Quincy. He's so badly injured," David said in a bad mood. "It's not the same. It's a pity that I didn't bring my warhammer. Otherwise, I could show off my skills." Myron was very envious of David's massacre today. "School will start in less than 10 days. What's your plan?" David asked, changing the topic. The last half of the 3rd year of high school was about to start. David was a bit hesitant about whether he should stop studying altogether and try to break through Kaji's basic standards. In any case, with his strength, speed, and mastery of various weapons, he could directly enter non-university without Galen's help. "What else can I plan? I have to go to class on time every day. My father won't let me become a special existence in the school," Myron said helplessly. David thought about his literature, 3% proficient, mathematics, 5% proficient, and general, 51% proficient abilities. It would be a pity if he gave up just like that. Although he didn't learn it himself, if he didn't take it seriously, he would feel sorry for the people who died in the explosion. Perhaps he should take the college entrance exam seriously to pay tribute to those who sacrificed their souls for him. Most importantly, he had already reached the limits of his mastery of several combat abilities. Ordinary practice could no longer improve them. Even his body had reached a bottleneck and could not break through in a short period of time. Currently, he only needed to practice the 18 styles of body arts once in the morning and once in the evening. This way, he would have a lot of time to spare. It's the same for me. I'm going to study cultural knowledge well next semester. When the time comes, I'll get a good grade. David said with a smile. Are you for real? I know your academic results. Although you can pass, you're still far from a good university. Your participation in the academic exam will definitely be your biggest stain. Myron shook his head and laughed. He had checked David's previous results. Those results could at most get him into an ordinary university. Compared to David's combat talent, Myron didn't believe that David was also talented in learning. How about we compete and see who has a higher cultural score in the college entrance exam? David looked at Myron and said with a smile, What bet? Myron's eyes lit up. He looked at the Death's Eye replica and asked. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. However, he didn't think about how David wouldn't bet if he wasn't sure. This Death's Eye replica. If you can beat me, I'll give it to you. What about you? David asked back. How about my Gladstone? It's much better than your Type 3. Myron said after thinking for a while. Deal, David said with a smile. To be honest, he didn't care about a Gladstone Type 6 anymore. With his wealth, it wouldn't be a problem for him to buy a better car. However, this was a game between him and Myron. Winning or losing didn't matter. Myron left with a proud look. When he left, he looked at the Death's Eye replica as if he was looking at his own private property. After Myron left, David called the shadow attendant over. When he was outside the city, he counted the larvae that were killed outside the city. Including the larvae that were killed by other people, there were a total of 32 larvae that died. One of them was killed by Myron with a sniper rifle, so he didn't absorb its soul. The rest of the larvae's souls were absorbed by the shadow attendant. He placed his hand on the shadow attendant's body, and a warm energy flowed into its soul. However, it was extremely short. After the warm energy disappeared, the shadow attendant opened its status panel. Its will increased by 0. 03, reaching 3. 43. He couldn't help but calculate in his mind. About 10 larvae souls could increase his will by 0. 01. The larvae souls were slightly weaker than a normal person's. Of course, it couldn't be compared to Kaji's soul. Kaji's soul could increase his will by 0. 1. After looking at the status panel, he checked the shadow attendant's body again. However, he didn't find any knowledge orbs. This made David very disappointed. Although he didn't know what the larvae's abilities were, if there was an extra ability, and it was a special ability that belonged to the insectoids, it would be very tempting. Could it be that the knowledge orbs can't be extracted from the insectoid souls? David whispered to himself. However, until now, the shadow attendant had only absorbed larvae souls. He still had to see if the more powerful insectoids above level 1 could surprise him. Of course, this wasn't something that could be achieved in a short period of time. With his current combat power, he probably wouldn't be able to survive if he encountered a level 1 insectoid. David didn't think about these things in the future. He picked up the Death's Eye replica and walked into the server room. In the server room, he used a micro scanner to scan the Death's Eye replica into a medium-sized server. Then, he put on the virtual helmet and entered the virtual world. In the virtual world, a Death's Eye replica appeared in front of him. All the data of the Death's Eye replica was exactly the same as the real thing. Even the ammunition was the same. David moved his hand, and the Death's Eye replica in front of him turned into a pile of data. Each piece of data corresponded to a part. He started to adjust the data according to his memory of the real Death's Eye. The gun was longer, and all the parts were proportionally larger. This was a delicate project. Fortunately, the Death's Eye replica was a smaller version of the Death's Eye, which made it easier for David to restore it. After a bit of adjustment, the data in front of David turned into a virtual object again. A Death's Eye that was exactly the same as the one in his memory appeared in front of David's eyes. At this time, the Death's Eye was not only the same size as the one in his memory, but it also had a button to switch between normal bullets and grade bullets. David increased the power of the bullets according to the performance of the replica. There was no data for the level 1 bullets, but that wasn't important. It could be said that the Death's Eye in the virtual world, except for the bullets that weren't level 1 bullets, its external and internal structure, including the recoil, were a perfect replica of the Death's Eye. David moved his finger in the air, and a set of data was generated. Then, a target appeared a kilometer away from him. He lay on the ground. Although everything was virtual, when his finger pressed on the trigger of the Death's Eye, he still felt the powerful feeling of shooting everything. He took a deep breath and maintained the stability of the muzzle. He locked onto the target with a specially installed T3 sniper assistance device. The calculation and analysis of the trajectory almost became his instinct. After 2 seconds of adjustment, he fired the bullet. The huge recoil instantly shattered his virtual body into pieces. These pieces immediately reassembled in the air and formed a new body. Ha ha ha! David laughed wildly. Although his virtual body was shattered by the recoil, he felt the familiar shooting sensation in the virtual world. He successfully replicated the Death's Eye, which was used to snipe Kaji, in his virtual world. In the future, he could practice with this near-real weapon. Of course, the consequence was that every time he fired, because he didn't have the parameters of the exoskeleton armor, he could only use his body to withstand it. Every time, his virtual body would collapse, but it wouldn't really die. Moreover, he could constantly feel the recoil of the Death's Eye. Chapter 63. David, why didn't you tell me that something had happened? Hans asked angrily from the ID bracelet. Father, nothing happened to me. It was just a small accident. The military promised to take care of it. David explained softly as he felt Hans' concern. You live alone and have your own thoughts, Hans said in a low voice. But you should have told me about this immediately. This is not the first time someone has targeted you. I will exert my influence on the military. Hopefully, we can find the person behind this and get rid of this trouble. David had been attacked many times this month. Although Hans had used all kinds of connections and even looked for clues inside Stead Hotel, he had not found any trace of the person behind this. Just when Hans thought that the person behind this would stop targeting David after Mr. Stead's death, something like this happened again. Thank you, Father, David said gratefully. Hans has almost never begged anyone, but for David's sake, Hans had repeatedly broken his usual style of doing things, including Garen, and using his own influence to track down the mercenaries. David had seen it all and was very touched. Don't go out for a while. Before the military finds anything, you should stay at home. School will start in a few days. You should read more books. Hans reminded him again and then hung up. David looked at the disappearing figure on the ID bracelet. This figure merged with his father in his previous life. A strong sense of kinship flowed in his heart. He could not help but laugh. His laughter made the empty room warm. The care of his father, Hans, also made him confirm his idea of getting rid of Trainer Jeremy. Although he did not know how big the organization was, Tamer Jeremy was definitely an important person in Parent City. The next morning, David put on the hooded jacket again. Because the scabbard was too eye-catching, he would not do anything in the daytime. So, he did not carry it on his back. He only carried a few small items. Before he went out, he habitually controlled the shadow attendant to fly out of the house and check the situation outside. Perhaps due to the military's investigation, or perhaps the organization did not directly monitor his movements, there was no suspicious person on the street outside the door. David was still a little worried. He took out the little toy signal isolator given by Leeson Security and set it to the smallest range of 1 meter, just enough to wrap his whole body in the signal isolator. There were only 2 ways to monitor people. One was manually, which was to send people to monitor people. The other was electronically, which was to monitor people through various surveillance and scanning probes. Even David suspected that the organization was monitoring him through the second method. The mysterious organization made him have to be extra careful. The advantage of the signal isolator was that it could prevent most electronic scanning devices from detecting his presence. As long as he was careful not to let the surveillance cameras capture his face, he didn't have to worry about the surveillance cameras. When he came out of the house, the shadow attendant was 10 meters above his head. He diverted some of his attention to observe his surroundings. Since his spirit had improved, he had gone through a long period of practice and adaptation. Now, he could easily divert some of his attention to the shadow attendant without affecting his own actions. Of course, if it was a fierce battle or something complicated, he still had to concentrate. He didn't dare to be distracted. He still couldn't master the true multitasking. He could only focus on himself and a small part of his attention as support. David was like a student running during the holidays. In fact, but his purpose was not simple. The gym where trainer Jeremy was located was not far from David's house. That was why David had chosen to go there. After 20 minutes of jogging, David approached the gym. The gym was in the middle of a commercial street, and it was very lively. David kept jogging and didn't stop. Although he had no experience in surveillance, he still knew the basic things to pay attention to. He lowered his head and only looked forward. His hood covered his face, so no one would notice anything unusual about him. In fact, the shadow attendant above him was checking the environment around the gym. Soon, he realized that he was too naive. Although there were a lot of people on the commercial street, no one stopped at the door of the gym. People were either passing by or directly entering the gym. If this was really a secret base of the organization, then he would be noticed by the people in the gym as long as he stood at the door for a while. He ran past the gym and continued to move forward. He wanted to see if there was any other direction that could get close to the gym. After passing by the gym, he found that the gym seemed to have paid special attention to something. The two shops on the left and right were high-end shops with a membership system. They wouldn't receive any strangers. David jogged while thinking about how to explore the gym. At that moment, he saw a strong figure coming out of the gym. Almost instantly, he recognized the person through the vision of the shadow attendant. It was Trainer Jeremy. He regretted not bringing his dual swords. Obviously, Trainer Jeremy was going out, and David had a better chance to kill Trainer Jeremy. As soon as Trainer Jeremy came out, a hover car stopped in front of him. Trainer Jeremy jumped into the driver's seat, and the hover car drove slowly in the center of the street. David was not in a hurry. The shadow attendant's vision range was too wide. There were not many tall buildings in Parent City, so the shadow attendant could see very far from 10 meters high. After Trainer Jeremy drove the hover car for 200 meters, David stopped a public hover car. David didn't specify a target. Instead, he chose the direction controlled by voice. The public hover car maintained the most standard speed and followed Trainer Jeremy. The distance between the two hover cars was nearly 300 meters. Normally, even professionals couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't be lost in this situation. However, David followed all the way through the shadow attendant. Trainer Jeremy's hover car stopped in front of a house. It was a mid-range house in the city. It was not eye-catching, but it was very suitable for Trainer Jeremy's identity. David also got out of the car 300 meters away from Trainer Jeremy. He already knew the target of the other party. The next step was how to approach it. He approached all the way to about 100 meters and took out the small toy micro scanner that was also given by Leeson Security Company. He didn't dare to scan the house that Trainer Jeremy entered. Instead, he chose the house on the left. Although the mini scanner was small, its ability was not weak at all. Soon, it scanned the entire residence once. The security system in this house was turned on, and no one was at home. David was already prepared for the security system. He took out the K2 military electronic detector from his waist bag and sent out a signal. He was lucky. This house used the security system of Leeson Security Company, and it was a low-level version of the security system. For David, who had studied the updated version of the Leeson security system and had the main server of Leeson Security Company, he had 98% proficiency in electronic countermeasures. This security system was broken by him in only 20 seconds. He looked around and didn't see anyone paying attention to him. He carefully avoided a few public surveillance cameras and came to the front door of the house. The door opened automatically as if welcoming the real owner. David took a pair of gloves and put them on. He then put on the shoe covers and entered the house. He didn't touch the items in the house. He just quickly walked to the wall next to the house next door. Fortunately, this was only a mid-range community. There was no space between the houses. They were all tightly connected. David sat on the ground and focused all his attention on the shadow attendant. Then the shadow attendant passed through the two walls and entered the house that Trainer Jeremy had just entered. Since the shadow attendant could only be 10 meters away from David, the shadow attendant could only observe most of the house. Unexpectedly, there was no sign of Trainer Jeremy. The shadow attendant's hearing was also very good. It didn't hear any sound. The whole house was very quiet. If David didn't see Trainer Jeremy enter the house with his own eyes, he would think that this was an empty house. Basement. He instantly figured out the reason. The shadow attendant's body went directly through the ground and dived down. Chapter 64. David felt that the shadow attendant went through the ground very smoothly, but then there seemed to be a membrane in front of him, blocking the shadow attendant's way of diving. Fortunately, the shadow servant forcefully pushed down on the barrier, and the barrier was forcefully passed through. This was the first time that David encountered such a situation when he was controlling the shadow attendant. In many environments that David tested before, whether it was steel, stone, and other building materials or various glass, wood, and other decoration materials, none of them could stop the shadow attendant's penetration. He always thought that the shadow attendant's penetration ability was omnipotent, but today he found that this unknown membrane limited the shadow attendant. Although it finally passed through, once the membrane became thicker, the shadow attendant couldn't do anything. The shadow attendant appeared in a basement that was bigger than the room above. Such a basement shouldn't appear in this kind of middle-class community. Some strange patterns were painted on the walls of the basement. These patterns connected together and surrounded the entire basement. David could clearly feel that the strange patterns seemed to contain some kind of power through the shadow attendant. This wasn't a common security system in the Interstellar Federation. Even David's electronic warfare knowledge couldn't explain these strange patterns. But after seeing the membrane just now, David guessed that the membrane was probably caused by these strange patterns. David also saw Trainer Jeremy. At this moment, he was standing in front of an altar. On the altar, there was a pitch-black statue. This statue didn't have a face, and even its body was wrapped in a large cloak. Trainer Jeremy looked at the ID bracelet on his wrist. It seemed like he was checking the time. The shadow attendant was also floating at the top of the basement, waiting quietly. David was also very curious about what Trainer Jeremy wanted to do in this strange basement at this time. Just when the time reached 9:30, a black fog suddenly began to appear on the altar, followed by a faint white light. The white light became stronger and stronger, and it broke through the black fog. It turned out to be a human figure. The shadow attendant's vision could see that the figure was somewhat illusory. This figure was like a virtual image when using the ID bracelet to communicate with someone. "Master, may the great God bless you." Trainer Jeremy's greeting was very strange, and his etiquette was also strange. It was a complicated and humble etiquette. At least in David's memory, he had never heard of this kind of etiquette. This kind of etiquette where the fingers drew a strange arc in the air and then retracted back to the chest while bowing, it was out of place in this world. "Jeremy, the Lord will also bless you," the old voice of the figure replied. At the same time, he replied with a slightly simpler but equally strange salute. Even if they weren't face to face, this kind of etiquette made this meeting was very formal. "Master, the National Night Project is not going well. I will apologize in the work report." Trainer Jeremy didn't get up. He continued to speak with his body bowed. "Jeremy, you are alone in Parent City. The organization can't help you much. If the National Night Project has a problem, I will speak for you from the organization." The figure said with some emotion. "Thank you, Master." Trainer Jeremy was obviously relieved and thanked the figure. "You are one of the important transportation points connecting to the organization. You must ensure that the transportation is smooth. There will be a batch of important materials arriving tonight. You will personally deliver this batch of materials to the transportation point." The figure's voice carried a commanding tone. "Yes, Master. I will ensure the safety of the materials." Trainer Jeremy responded loudly. "Jeremy, come back when the National Night plan succeeds. It's time for you to be promoted. The organization needs a powerful warrior like you." The figure's voice became gentler after he finished talking about the important matter. "I am willing to serve you, Master." Trainer Jeremy's voice was filled with excitement. "Okay, this is the end of the communication," the figure said with a hint of tiredness. Then the white figure became smaller, and the black mist wrapped around the white figure. The black mist slowly returned to the altar. Trainer Jeremy was obviously a little excited. He waved his hand in the air, and a white light appeared. There was a tearing sound in the air. David, who was in the house next door, swallowed his saliva gently. Fortunately, he came to check Trainer Jeremy's skills in advance. At first, he thought that Trainer Jeremy only had the combat power of an ordinary Kaji. If David launched a sneak attack with 2 level 2 swords, there was a high possibility that he could kill Trainer Jeremy. However, the information revealed by Trainer Jeremy's unintentional waving of his hand made David extremely surprised. From David's perspective, after experiencing the fusion of many combat knowledge light balls and the baptism of various combat illusions, he had a general judgment of Kaji's combat power. From the ordinary Kaji to the top-level Kaji, like the leader of the Celestial Wolf mercenary group, Fireman, he could judge the strength of each one. However, David could not judge the strength of Trainer Jeremy, who revealed a little of his strength. David even suspected that Trainer Jeremy's strength was comparable to Galen's. Shaking his head violently, David removed this thought from his mind. If he was really that strong, he would not have used any schemes. He could have killed David directly with just a single move. Just like Galen, facing the seemingly powerful Kaji, he could kill them all with one hand. If Trainer Jeremy was really that powerful, David's first thought would be to tell his father, Hans, and Galen. He would never be ready to kill Trainer Jeremy by himself. It should be some kind of special combat skill. David explained to himself. Trainer Jeremy bowed to the statue and whispered something in his mouth. The shadow attendant's hearing could not hear the content clearly. After a while, he straightened up and left the basement. The shadow attendant once again struggled to pass through the membrane and returned to the ground. He saw that Trainer Jeremy did not stop and walked directly out of the house. David let the shadow attendant fly as far as possible in the air as he watched Trainer Jeremy get on the hover car and leave. Only then did he leave the house and restore the security system. At this moment, David could not help but sigh at his own unprofessionalism. If he had a tracker, he could install one on Trainer Jeremy's hover car. He would not have to rush to find a public hover car like now. Fortunately, the public transport service in Parent City was not bad. After only 10 seconds, an empty public hover car passed by and was stopped by David. At this time, the shadow attendant could only vaguely see the rear of Trainer Jeremy's hover car. Fortunately, Trainer Jeremy was not in a hurry. The hover car maintained a steady speed. David felt that he could be a detective now. Since he had the shadow attendant, he could monitor and track targets from hundreds of meters or even thousands of meters away. Although this time, he almost lost Trainer Jeremy, David still managed to keep up. This time, Trainer Jeremy was heading in the direction of the north of the city. Unlike the other directions, the north of the city was an industrial area. Almost all the factories were concentrated there. Due to transportation restrictions, although Parent City had aircraft that connected to the outside world, due to the cost of transportation and certain risks, a large number of living materials still relied on local self-sufficiency. This was almost very common in the Monolith Star. For example, in the commercial streets of Parent City, most of the goods were produced locally. Only high-end luxury goods, some particularly high-end electronic equipment, or other goods that could not be produced in Parent City were transported from outside. The jobs created by these factories also supported more than half of the people in Parent City. Trainer Jeremy's hover car drove through a gate. David looked at it from afar. At the same time, he pulled up the map and found that it was a garbage disposal factory. David frowned. This garbage disposal factory was a municipal enterprise. How could it be related to Trainer Jeremy? At the same time, he could not enter the garbage disposal factory. It was not that he could not crack the security alarm, but it was working hours. There were municipal vehicles going in and out of the garbage disposal factory from time to time, and many workers were working inside. Could it be that the contact point is inside this garbage disposal plant? David's heart was full of doubts. The strangeness of the organization made him have the urge to leave. But thinking about the National Night program that Trainer Jeremy mentioned, it was not difficult to guess that it was related to Hans's National Night title. Chapter 65. David couldn't enter the garbage treatment plant, so he used the simplest and most direct method. He used the K2 military electronic detector to break the security system of the garbage treatment plant. Although the garbage treatment plant was a municipal enterprise, perhaps because there was nothing to steal here, or perhaps the municipal government didn't pay much attention to it, the security protection here was not strong. David took 2 minutes to solve the security system of the garbage treatment plant and entered its monitoring system. Through the monitoring system, he saw Trainer Jeremy's hover car parked in front of a warehouse at the back of the garbage treatment plant. David didn't rush. He waited slowly. It wasn't until an hour later that Trainer Jeremy left the warehouse. This time, David didn't follow Trainer Jeremy anymore. He decided to enter the garbage treatment plant first to find out why Trainer Jeremy came here. David let the public hover car go around the industrial area until noon, and he returned to the garbage treatment plant again. At this time, the people in the factory began to leave in 2s and 3s. The smell of the garbage treatment plant was a bit strong, so these factory workers didn't eat here at noon. Instead, they went to a nearby restaurant to eat. When David entered the factory from the side door, the people in the factory were resting and eating. No one noticed that an outsider had entered. Of course, this was also because David controlled the security system so that he didn't exist in the monitoring system at all. Otherwise, no matter how loose the security system was, it would have discovered a stranger like him. David had the shadow attendant to observe in the air. He carefully avoided possible contact all the way and smoothly entered the warehouse. After arriving here, David was surprised to find that the security system of the garbage treatment plant was not the same as the security system of the warehouse. This made him wonder what kind of secret there was that it required 2 sets of security systems to protect it. David tried to send a signal with the K2 military electronic detector and tried to connect to the warehouse's security system. The electronic countermeasure ability that had always been successful encountered trouble at this time. The security system used in this warehouse was very high level, almost comparable to the military level. He could indeed break it, but the price of breaking it was that there was a great possibility that an alarm would be raised and his actions would be discovered. This wasn't his idea, but he wasn't a pure electronic warfare master. He had the shadow attendant as a helper. When a shadow attendant passed through the warehouse, the same barrier appeared in front of the shadow attendant. However, the experienced shadow attendant only needed to try a few more times to pass through the barrier. The warehouse was huge and empty. There was nothing in it. The shadow attendant did not have the ability to enter the room to investigate. It could not be more than 10 meters away from David. This restriction meant that it could only move near the door. Through the vision of a shadow servant, David judged the security layout of the warehouse with his professional eyes as an electronic warfare engineer. Soon, he was outside the warehouse, and the shadow attendant followed him inside the warehouse. They arrived in front of a protruding wall. The shadow attendant went inside. Inside was the main optical computer of the security system. It was a special military-level optical computer. No wonder the security level here was so high. The shadow attendant's fingers quickly operated on the optical computer. Any security system, the optical computer would become useless if it was controlled. Of course, this was for high-level electronic warfare masters. 3 minutes later, with a crisp sound, the security system of the optical computer was completely breached. This kind of optical computer was completely closed. Except for people with authority to connect to some data from the outside, it was impossible to directly check from the optical computer. The authority that David obtained in the optical computer was almost impossible to be discovered. This time, David stood in front of the door again. The door opened automatically, and David flashed in. David controlled the door to close. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Although it looked simple, in fact, today's tracking made David very nervous. He had never done this kind of thing before. He was always worried that something would go wrong and let the other party find out. He was also very satisfied with the results of today's tracking. He found Trainer Jeremy's home and the incomparably secretive and strange basement in the home. He also found the organization's secret base in the garbage disposal factory and obtained the authority to access the secret base. David was very careful. Although he could see everything around him at a glance, he knew that this place wasn't that simple. He had tried to scan this warehouse with a mini scanner before, but he found that the warehouse was empty when the scanner scanned it. The so-called empty here, including the optical computer of the security system found by the shadow attendant, couldn't be scanned. This meant that the strange pattern on the wall not only blocked the shadow attendant's entry, but also prevented the electronic scanning system from scanning the secret. As David came into contact with more and more secrets of this organization, things became more and more strange. Instead of using the identity bracelet, they used the unexplainable altar to communicate, and the strange pattern that could block scanning, and the strange etiquette. All of these made David feel like he came into contact with some great secret. To find the secret of this warehouse, David didn't need to do it himself. He controlled the shadow attendant to fly around the warehouse and make sure that there was nothing in the warehouse. When the shadow attendant tried to fly down, it made a big discovery. David used the K2 military electronic detector to open the optical computer, found a control system, and activated it. Then the ground in the middle of the warehouse separated to reveal the underground part. An aircraft covered with strange patterns appeared in front of David. The patterns on the surface of the aircraft were similar to the patterns on the walls of the warehouse, but more delicate. Like the previous basement and the current warehouse, the patterns on the walls were painted with paint, but the patterns on the surface of the aircraft were inlaid with a special metal-like material. It was far more complicated than the patterns on the walls. David tried to use the K2 military electronic detector to connect to the electronic control system of the aircraft, but there was no response after the signal was sent. He even had a feeling that the aircraft in front of him didn't have an electronic control system. This was almost impossible. According to the experience of the serious mercenary group's electronic detector, even a large battleship should have an electronic control system. It was just that the electronic control system was bigger and more intelligent. For a small aircraft like this that was 10 meters wide and 15 meters long, if there was no electronic control system, without the help of artificial intelligence, it would be very troublesome to control. Could it be that the patterns on the surface are affecting the signal of the K2 military electronic detector? David muttered. He controlled the shadow attendant to fly to the side of the aircraft and wanted to let the shadow attendant enter. This time, the shadow attendant was met with a great resistance. The resistance was so great that the shadow attendant failed multiple times. Looking at the aircraft in front of him, David felt helpless. If he had a level 2 long sword in his hands, he would have had the thought to split open its shell. He had a feeling that the aircraft in front of him was even more valuable than Garen's Black Phantom. He could understand the Black Phantom, but he couldn't understand the aircraft in front of him at all. David felt like he was standing beside a treasure mountain, but he couldn't enter it. In the Interstellar Federation, aircraft were extremely valuable means of transportation. Although there was a requirement that the pilot must have a certain level of social authority, it was almost everyone's dream. For example, Garen's Black Phantom could fly in the interior of the monolith planet at super high speed. Even if it encountered a level 2 Zerg, it could still escape with its speed. Not to mention, the Black Phantom also had the ability to fly in space. Sigh. David let out a long sigh. After many experiments, he finally gave up the idea of owning the aircraft in front of him. He looked at the time. The lunch break was almost over, so he had to leave. At this time, he also understood why Trainer Jeremy had come over. It was to prepare for the operation at night and to check the status of the aircraft in advance. It was just that David didn't know where the so-called transportation point was and needed such an aircraft to send it there. He reluctantly closed the ground, carefully cleaned up the traces, and left the warehouse. Once again, he used the shadow attendant's ability to avoid the workers and left the garbage disposal factory through the side door. Chapter 66. The Gladstone Type 3 was parked in the dark not far from the garbage disposal factory. The street lights couldn't reach it, and the car's body couldn't be seen from the street. David was sitting in the car with the scabbard on his back and the Death's Eye replica in his hand. Although the Death's Eye replica made a loud noise, this was an industrial area. There was almost no one here at night, so the security here was completely handed over to the security system. David spent the entire afternoon hacking into all the security systems in the nearby industrial area and then installed the control program in them. Since he brought the Death's Eye replica today, he wanted to solve the problem from afar, sniping someone without exoskeleton armor. No matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be able to block the power of the Death's Eye replica. Although the Death's Eye replica wasn't even 1/10 of the real Death's Eye, it wasn't something a body of flesh and blood could block. After David determined that Jeremy would definitely come here at night, he made this extremely bold plan. In the city, within the range of Skynet, he would use the Death's Eye replica to snipe. In order to resist the surveillance of the Sky's Eye, he had already activated the signal isolator to the maximum range, completely isolating the surrounding area from the signal. Coupled with his control of all the security systems in the industrial area, the entire industrial area became his world at night. The K2 military electronic detector next to David's hand sent a surveillance image. It was an ordinary hover car, the one Jeremy was using. In the driver's seat, Jeremy was focused on driving the hover car. Not long ago, he received a transfer of resources from the organization. He needed to transfer these resources to a transport point and then send them out of the war zone. Due to the special geographical location of the monolith planet, as the furthest war zone planet near the war star, there were a large number of interstellar battleships behind the monolith planet. Therefore, the resources from the war star had to stop at the monolith planet and then be transported out in a more secretive way. Due to Parent City's remote location, it became one of the important transit points for the transfer of resources. On the other side, David had already walked out of the Gladstone Type 3. He laid a mat on the ground and then laid down the Death's Eye replica on the ground. The mat wasn't for comfort, but to reduce the impact of the recoil so that he could have better control of multiple shots. David didn't underestimate Jeremy. The terrifying swing of Jeremy's hand was still fresh in his memory. This made David give up his original plan of using a level 2 double sword ambush and switch to using the Death replica to snipe from afar. And he specifically chose the street that was 5 kilometers long in front of the garbage treatment plant. He set the sniping distance to be 2 kilometers. Regardless of whether the sniping was successful or not, Trainer Jeremy could not easily leave the attack range of the sniper rifle. The Death's Eye replica had a maximum attack range of 5,000 meters, although its accuracy would be greatly reduced at such a long distance. Although it would be less accurate when compared to the real Kaji, David's sniping skills ensured that it was accurate. David calmly prepared. The K2 military electronic countermeasure was the surveillance from when they had just entered the industrial zone. It was still a few minutes away. He loaded all 50 bullets into the chamber and began to analyze the effect of the environment on the shooting through the T3 sniper assistance device. After determining the shooting range, he verified the results many times to make sure there were no mistakes. Inside the T3 sniper assistance device, The lights of the hover cars in the distance could be seen clearly from afar. Under the illumination of the street lamps, everything within a range of 2,000 meters could be seen clearly. Beyond 2,000 meters, everything was a little blurry. However, with the adjustment of the T3 sniper assistance device, the range was still acceptable between 2 to 4,000 meters. Beyond that, he could only aim roughly. When the hover car reached 2,300 meters, David held his breath. The Death's Eye replica was so stable that it was like it was welded to the ground. 2,200 meters, 2,100 meters. As the 2,000 meters got closer and closer, the killing intent in David's eyes became more and more intense. When the hover car reached 2,000 meters, the killing intent in David's eyes reached its peak. The Death's Eye replica in his hand suddenly exploded, and a bullet with his killing intent was shot out. However, as soon as David fired, Jeremy, who was sitting in the hover car, seemed to have predicted it in advance. He directly rushed out of the car from the driver's seat. David's eyes narrowed. This killing blow was dodged by Jeremy. However, he couldn't stop now. The moment Jeremy was in the air, the Death's Eye replica fired again. Ah! Jeremy roared in the air, and a white light appeared on his body. Because he was in the air, he couldn't dodge at all. The sniper bullet hit him with terrifying kinetic energy. The terrifying kinetic energy made Jeremy's body spin in the air, as if he was struck by lightning. However, David wasn't happy at all. From David's T3 sniper assistance device, he could clearly see that the bullet was blocked by the armor on Jeremy's body. It was armor, but it wasn't exoskeleton armor. It was an armor made of pure white light, and it was worn on Jeremy's body. David couldn't understand what was happening in front of him. The armor made of white light, including the bullet that hit the armor, made him fall into a short period of confusion. Jeremy took advantage of David's confusion to land on his feet. He didn't run away because he knew very well that in the face of Sniper, running away was the worst choice. His face was gloomy because he exposed his ability in front of so many surveillance cameras. He could no longer live in this city in the future. His plan, his work, and all the price the organization paid for him were all destroyed because of the sniper in front of him. Die! Jeremy shouted violently. His feet slammed on the ground. The friction between his shoes and the ground caused a dent in the solid ground. His figure turned into white light and rushed in the direction of David. David also woke up at this time. His hands were still steady. He calculated the trajectory of the bullet in his mind and fired the third bullet. Like the first shot just now, Trainer Jeremy had some kind of prediction ability. His body that was rushing forward moved to the side, and the bullet flew past his body. His eyes flashed with anger. He wanted to tear the enemy in front of him to eliminate the anger in his heart. He thought of the disappointment of the boss and the punishment of the organization. David also entered the state at this time. The third missed shot didn't affect him. He fired the fourth shot, and at the same time, he didn't stop and fired the fifth bullet. Jeremy moved again, and at the same time, although the speed of his body slowed down, he didn't stop moving forward. The fourth bullet flew past his body again, but the fifth bullet was in front of him at this time, and he lost the opportunity to dodge. Master! This thought flashed in Jeremy's mind. This sniper was definitely very experienced since he came up with a way to deal with him in such a short time. Trainer Jeremy tried his best to avoid hitting his vital parts and blocked the bullet with the thickest armor on his shoulder. However, the white light armor shook visibly. David knew very well that the white light armor on Jeremy's body was extremely powerful, but it was absolutely impossible for him to be immune to sniper bullets. Otherwise, Jeremy didn't have to dodge the bullets at all. He just had to rush directly in front of him. For the prediction ability, David didn't know how Jeremy did it, but he could destroy this prediction by increasing the shooting frequency of the bullets. Sure enough, the fifth bullet hit Jeremy, making it impossible for him to predict and dodge. David also saw the shaking white light armor, which proved that the white light armor was not invincible. As long as there were enough attacks, the white light armor would collapse. Chapter 67. Trainer Jeremy, who was wearing white armor, was hit in the shoulder by the fifth sniper bullet. The powerful impact made his body involuntarily stop moving forward. Instead, he fell backward. However, his ability to control his body was extremely strong. He rolled on the ground and successfully avoided David's sixth sniper bullet and eliminated all the impact on his body. At this time, he was still 1,500 meters away from David, and there was no place to hide on the wide street. Trainer Jeremy regretted that he didn't bring his weapon with him. He changed his way of moving forward. His body constantly moved left and right irregularly, making it difficult for David to aim. This was very similar to David's indeterminate target in the shooting hall, but Trainer Jeremy's speed was faster and more strange. He seemed to have learned footwork specifically to deal with snipers. This made David's seventh and eighth sniper bullets miss. After all, the Death's Eye replica was just a replica. Its bullet speed was not the same as the real Death's Eye. So even if David had the ability to snipe Kaji, he couldn't fully use it. The 3 consecutive bullets all missed because of the equipment. His aim was not a problem at all, but Trainer Jeremy's footwork could change direction in short distance. The bullets fired by the Death's Eye replica were still flying in the air, but Trainer Jeremy had already dodged. David stopped shooting. This kind of shooting couldn't give Trainer Jeremy a fatal blow. Instead, it was a waste of his own stamina and ammunition. His body on the ground shook quickly, releasing the recoil force of the 8 consecutive sniper bullets. Now what he needed to do was to wait for Trainer Jeremy to get closer. That way, he could shorten the time of the bullets in the air. Of course, doing this would also make him more dangerous. The powerful combat power displayed by Trainer Jeremy was almost no less than Kaji in exoskeleton armor. Once Trainer Jeremy got close, David didn't have much confidence to survive. He took 2 deep breaths to clear his mind. The focus in his eyes didn't change because of Trainer Jeremy's approach. Trainer Jeremy didn't change his footwork because David stopped shooting. He kept moving forward with special footwork, and his speed didn't slow down too much. About 1 kilometer away, David launched another attack. This time, he didn't stop. He fired 5 sniper bullets in a row, almost blocking the space around Trainer Jeremy. This kind of intensive shooting method, if it was the real Death's Eye, the recoil was enough to make David's body collapse. Even if it was a replica, David had to use the technique to release the accumulated recoil in his body, which made him stop shooting for 3 seconds. But his attack was not in vain. The continuous attack of 5 sniper bullets forced Trainer Jeremy to choose to block a sniper bullet to get rid of this round of attack. This time, Trainer Jeremy chose the other shoulder blade. The huge impact made his face pale. This time, because of the range, his reaction time was too short. The sniper bullet didn't hit the thickest part of the white light armor on the shoulder blade. The white light armor shook violently, and the color became a little dim. However, David couldn't chase him, so he could use the roll to reduce the attack again. At a distance of 1 kilometer, the 2 sides looked at each other, and the distance in the middle was the distance between life and death. Until now, Trainer Jeremy still didn't see who the sniper hiding in the dark was. He was judging one possibility after another in his mind. Was it an assassin, the military, or someone in the organization who didn't want him to exist? In the 3 seconds when David recovered, Trainer Jeremy rushed forward again. At the same time, he was thinking about the attacker in his mind. If it was a commercial assassin, it was definitely not a good choice to hire an ordinary sniper and set up such a big scene in the industrial area. It was even more impossible for the military. If it was the military, there would be at least several Kaji and a large number of soldiers. Even if his defense was strong, he couldn't resist so many attacks. Someone in the organization. He couldn't help but be shocked when he thought of this. This was the most likely possibility. "I want to see who you are," he roared. After David adjusted his body and restored himself to his peak state, the Death's Eye replica in his hand shot again. This time, he didn't choose the fatal upper body, but aimed at Trainer Jeremy's legs, trying to slow him down in this way. 3 consecutive shots, Three sniper bullets in a triangle shape blocked the space of nearly 2 meters on the left side of Trainer Jeremy's legs. Trainer Jeremy's legs turned into a shadow, and he successfully rushed through the triangle-shaped sniper bullets. However, in David's T3 sniper assistance device, he could see that there was a bloody mark on Trainer Jeremy's leg. The blood-red color of the scar was expanding, which made David happy. However, Trainer Jeremy didn't seem to be affected at all. His speed was not affected. In the distance of 1 kilometer to 500 meters, David shot a total of 23 sniper bullets, adding a few more insignificant wounds on Trainer Jeremy's body. When the distance was less than 500 meters, the speed of each sniper bullet was enough to make Trainer Jeremy's reaction speed difficult to make the most timely response. However, David knew in his heart that there were still 10 bullets in his Death's Eye replica. At this time, he had no time to reload. This sniper plan, which he thought was easy, had now evolved into a life and death situation. Trainer Jeremy could already see David's face clearly, and he shouted, "It's you, David." This student, who he had never paid attention to, had successfully exposed him. Although he plotted to kill David, he had to make David's death look more like an accident due to the influence of Hans's National Night title. He didn't understand how his plan failed until today. It turned out that David had been deceiving him. With such sniper ability, such endurance, how could he be the student he deceived? This kind of sniper ability, without systematic military training, without amazing sniper talent. How could he have this kind of sniper ability? "I will kill you, and I will take your head away. I will torture your soul and make you regret everything you have done." Trainer Jeremy roared. At this time, he was hit by bullets in many places, and the white light armor had been broken in many places. However, he could reduce the damage to the minimum every time, so he could still have half of his combat power. At a distance of 2 kilometers, he was facing a professional sniper, but he only paid such a small price, and he was already very close to the sniper. At this point, he was definitely proud. David's eyes were cold, like an emotionless machine. The more dangerous it was, the more his sniper talent showed terrifying emotional control. It was because of the close distance that the Death's Eye replica in his hand became more powerful. Trainer Jeremy shouted a series of strange words, and the originally dim white light armor on his body flashed again, but it didn't restore the white light armor. Instead, it emitted a soft light that wrapped all the wounds on his body. In just a second, those bleeding wounds stopped bleeding. At such a close distance, David saw that the wounds on Trainer Jeremy's body had scabbed, and even some of the slight wounds fell off automatically after the scabbing, and the wounds were completely healed. "Stop him," David thought in his heart, and fired 2 more sniper bullets. He didn't have much ammunition left, and he had to calculate every shot accurately. Even if he had the sniper ability to snipe Kaji, he still lacked experience. He wasted too much ammunition in the previous battle, and he didn't replenish it in time. 2 sniper bullets were shot at Trainer Jeremy one after another. These 2 sniper bullets were aimed at his head and chest. Trainer Jeremy shouted the strange language again, and his face became even paler, but the white light armor on his body shone again. This time, a white light shield appeared in his hand. Chapter 68. Trainer Jeremy had been planning since the beginning. After being ambushed, he chose to kill the sniper because he was confident that he would win. This confidence came from his special explosive ability. Although he needed to recuperate for a while afterwards, it was fatal for David at this time. 2 sniper bullets hit the white light shield. The white light shield kept shaking, but did not dissipate. Trainer Jeremy seemed to have the ability to control shields. Although the white light shield was hit hard, it did not affect his speed. Most of the impact force was cleverly offset by him when the 2 sniper bullets hit the shield. 400 meters. David shot out another 4 sniper bullets. The white light shield kept shaking. 300 meters. David shot out another 3 sniper bullets. After the last bullet hit the white light shield, it turned into white light spots and dissipated. Along with the white light shield, the white light armor on Trainer Jeremy's body also dissipated. Trainer Jeremy, rushed into the range of 200 meters. The Death's Eye replica was not very useful. Although the T3 sniper support device could be adjusted automatically, at such a close distance, it was more difficult to aim. David jumped up from the ground. With a swipe of his hands, 2 level 2 long swords appeared in his hands. He was not a pure sniper. He did not have the courage to wait for the enemy to rush in front of him and shoot. However, he was much stronger than a pure sniper in close range. He had level 2 long swords and 80% sword mastery. Kill! David stood in place to ease the recoil from his body. After adjusting his breathing, he let out a loud roar and charged forward to meet the attack. Just 50 meters away from the sniper point, the two met. Trainer Jeremy's face was frighteningly pale, but his eyes were cruel. Although he was surprised that David had a pair of level 2 longswords, no matter how strong a level 2 longsword was, it depended on who was using it. Although he didn't have a weapon, when they met, he was the first to attack David. A white light flew out like a whip. David's figure flashed as he nimbly dodged the white whip. At the same time, the level 2 longsword in his hand attempted to slash at the white whip. Trainer Jeremy didn't let the white light whip dodge. The white light whip in his hand even met the level 2 long sword. The white whip coiled around the level 2 long sword and pierced towards David's hand like a snake. Even though David had a lot of combat experience in his illusions, he had never encountered such an unexpected attack. However, his reaction was also very fast. His body dodged sideways, and the long sword in his hand moved quickly to cut the white whip. The long sword in his other hand swept towards Trainer Jeremy's wrist. Trainer Jeremy was surprised by David's swordsmanship. This kind of swordsmanship was not ordinary. Who could have such a powerful sniping ability and such swordsmanship at the same time? This made his killing intent even thicker. Killing a genius was something to be excited about. With a shake of the white light whip, it turned into a white light sword. Trainer Jeremy held the hilt with both hands and waved the sword at David. David suddenly realized that Trainer Jeremy's swordsmanship was not weaker than his, and because Trainer Jeremy's swordsmanship was more like a heavy two-handed sword fighting style, David, who was a master of both swords, was constantly pushed back for a while. Trainer Jeremy's swordsmanship was very experienced. Every strike was perfect. Strength, speed, and footwork were all seamless. David could only keep retreating to reduce the pressure given to him by Trainer Jeremy. Although Trainer Jeremy had the upper hand, he was not very happy because David's retreat was not chaotic. David's double sword agility fighting style was suitable for a long time fighting. Trainer Jeremy didn't want to waste time with David for a long time. The situation here could be discovered by Skynet at any time. He didn't know that David had already taken control of the security system of the entire industrial area. It would not be easy for Skynet to find out. At least before Skynet found anything unusual, they would not pay attention to this place. David kept retreating while sweeping Trainer Jeremy's vital points with his sword from time to time, so that he could not attack without any scruples. If anyone knew of the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group's leader Froman's fighting style, they would find it strange that David, who had inherited Froman's longsword mastery, wasn't engaging in a skirmish battle. Instead, he was retreating with purpose. One attacking and one retreating, the battle was in a stalemate. Die! Trainer Jeremy suddenly slapped his chest hard. His eyes suddenly brightened a lot. David felt an invisible spike suddenly piercing his brain. It caused severe pain in his brain almost instantly. His body could not help but soften and fall back. Blood spilled out of Trainer Jeremy's mouth. His body was also shaking slightly. Although this move was powerful, it consumed a lot of his energy. Especially in the process of the previous battle, both his physical strength and mental strength had reached a low point. This time, the explosion made his body even weaker. However, he was still very confident in the effect of this move. Let alone David, who was not a Kaji, even a real Kaji would not be able to resist this spiritual attack in front of him. Mental strength was the most difficult to master. Even if he had received the relevant inheritance, he could only use one mental attack. "David, you lost," Trainer Jeremy said with a laugh. The blood in his mouth made him look particularly ferocious. David's situation was very strange. His soul was suffering from an irresistible sting. This kind of pain went straight to his soul, making his whole body weak. He no longer had any ability to fight. However, when he was retreating, part of his mind was transferred to the shadow attendant's body. At this time, he was not affected at all. While Trainer Jeremy was laughing, the invisible shadow attendant was lying behind the Death's Eye replica. At such a close distance, it did not even need to aim. It could tell whether Trainer Jeremy, who was less than 10 meters away, was being aimed at by just looking at the direction of the muzzle. "You are a genius, but you are destined to be a genius that I will kill," Trainer Jeremy said as he walked forward step by step. He was very clear about the consequences of a mental attack. David could hear him at this time, which meant that David's mental strength was naturally strong. However, this was normal. The prerequisite for any genius was to have a higher mental strength than others. This way, they could learn faster and improve faster than others. David's body was almost unconscious. The sting did not disappear with time. Instead, it was constantly consuming David's mental strength. He tried to open his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. "What last words do you want to say?" Trainer Jeremy leaned forward and asked with a sneer. At this moment, he did not notice that the barrel of the Death's Eye replica on the ground was in a straight line with his head. In an instant, Trainer Jeremy felt a creepy sense of danger. Although he tried hard to move his body, his injured and weak body could not be controlled as easily as usual. Boom! A sniper bullet, which was the last sniper bullet of the Death's Eye replica, flew out of the barrel. It was less than 10 meters away. Even if Trainer Jeremy was in his best condition, he would not be able to dodge this attack. David saw the expression on Trainer Jeremy's face through the eyes of the shadow attendant. Disbelief, fear, despair, and a trace of regret. Although David's combat experience was obtained from illusions, he was an IT professional in his previous life. He had good programming skills. He understood combat as a programming process. He prepared a judgment sentence for each possible loophole. It was just like he prepared a backup plan in case he lost the battle. He never thought that Trainer Jeremy would be so strong. He was so strong that the Death's Eye replica sniper rifle had limited effect on him. In fact, with Trainer Jeremy's combat power, if David did not use the Death's Eye replica to destroy his white light armor, there was almost no chance of victory. Trainer Jeremy, who was wearing white light armor, was more like an armored soldier wearing exoskeleton armor. There was almost no difference in combat power. Chapter 69. Trainer Jeremy's head was like a broken watermelon. Red flesh and white brain tissue flew everywhere, and he fell back heavily. All his means were useless in front of a sniper bullet at close range. After Trainer Jeremy fell, David felt that the pain of the needle had miraculously disappeared. Although his spirit was still weak, he was able to recover his ability to move. The shadow attendant looked at Trainer Jeremy as if it saw a delicious meal. It took the initiative to fly to the place where Trainer Jeremy fell. It took a deep breath on the corpse, and then it felt the intoxicating feeling of the soul. Even if David only used a part of his mind to feel it, it still made him lose his mind for 10 seconds. However, he couldn't relax at this moment. The big problem of Trainer Jeremy was solved, but the follow-up matters needed to be dealt with quickly. Standing up shakily, he came to Trainer Jeremy's side and looked at Trainer Jeremy, who had half of his head missing. Only then did he feel relieved. The shadow attendant had just absorbed the soul, but David didn't see the real death of Trainer Jeremy, so he was still a little worried. Trainer Jeremy's cunning and strength were something David had never seen before. Even Garen needed to have a close armor to exert his strength. Unlike Trainer Jeremy, who relied entirely on himself to fight, especially the white light armor and the white light shield, which made Trainer Jeremy's speed reach a terrifying level. David even thought that if he really faced Trainer Jeremy in the white light armor face-to-face, he might not even be able to take one hit. Because when Trainer Jeremy rushed forward before, not only did he show speed, but also powerful strength. It was like a person without exoskeleton armor fighting with Kaji with exoskeleton armor. There was a huge gap in speed and strength, so skills were no longer valuable. Not to mention that Trainer Jeremy's swordsmanship was not worse than his. Villains die because they talk too much. David inexplicably thought of this sentence, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He turned around and prepared to put the Death's Eye replica back into the Gladstone Model 3. When he held the Death's Eye replica, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a hint of a smile. Who would have thought that the two sides of the battle, he himself had nearly 1,000 kilograms of strength, and Trainer Jeremy's strength was more than 1,000 kilograms. However, such a battle was ended by 100 grams of strength. The Shadow Attendant's 100 grams of strength was just enough to pull the trigger. He couldn't even move the gun a bit. However, with David's cooperation, he was able to kill the Shadow Attendant. After putting away the Death's Eye replica, David's body also recovered some strength. He picked up Jeremy's body. Normally, it would not take much effort for him to carry such a corpse, but now he felt that it was extremely heavy. He carried the corpse to a hover car parked on the side of the road. The car's window had been pierced by a sniper bullet, and the roof had been shattered. He threw the corpse into the car. Then he took out the K2 military electronic detector and forcibly obtained permission to drive the hover car. The sniper bullet did not cause any damage to the important parts of the hover car, so David easily drove the hover car into the waste treatment plant. David came in front of the suppressor, which was used to deal with old hover cars. He did not immediately move. He began to search the hover car. Soon, he found an alloy suitcase from the back seat. The suitcase needed a password to unlock. David put the suitcase aside and carefully checked it again. He also searched Trainer Jeremy's body. On Trainer Jeremy's neck, David found a pendant that looked like a talisman. The reason why he paid attention to it was because there were strange patterns on its surface that he could not understand. In particular, the shape of the pendant reminded him of the strange aircraft because the shape of the two were very similar. David did not find anything else. He threw the body into the incinerator on the side, drove the hover car into the suppressor, and then controlled the working arm to turn on the energy on both sides. Soon, the hover car was turned into a flat piece of scrap metal, and Trainer Jeremy had completely disappeared from this world. After doing all this, David went to the warehouse again. He opened the warehouse door and opened the floor. The aircraft full of patterns was once again exposed in front of him. He held the pendant in his hand and came in front of the aircraft. To his disappointment, the aircraft did not change at all. Did I guess wrong? David said to himself, unwilling to give up. He habitually divided part of his attention to the Shadow Attendant. Through the Shadow Attendant's eyes, he saw the pendant was different for what he saw. There was a faint light flashing on the pendant. David's heart skipped a beat. The Shadow Attendant flew closer and grabbed the pendant. The small pendant was not 100 grams, so it was easily picked up by the Shadow Attendant. Just as the Shadow Attendant picked up the pendant, the patterns on the surface of the aircraft began to twist. Then, a passage appeared on the side of the aircraft. David walked in. He realized that this was a real small spaceship. Even if he did not know much about spaceships, he could tell that this small spaceship was not normal. The materials used to make the shell of the small spaceship were all grade 1 materials. The faint fluorescent light made David feel dizzy. Although this small spaceship was much smaller than Galen's Black Phantom, the body of the spaceship was 10 meters wide and 15 meters long. The grade 1 materials used to make it made David feel like it was extremely luxurious. As for the other configurations, he could not tell much. He did not do much research in this area. He took out the K2 military electronic countermeasure device and wanted to crack the AI system of this small spaceship. But strangely, although he connected to the system of this small spaceship, he could not find the AI system. Is the spaceship really manually operated? David said in disappointment. If it was really manually operated, then he would not be able to pilot this spaceship. At this time, His attention on the shadow attendant received a strange neutral language that he could not understand. If only it's the Federation's common language. While the attention on the shadow attendant's side was thinking, the voice changed to the Interstellar Federation's common language. "Hello, Captain. Fire Beacon awaits your orders." "Who are you?" David asked through the shadow attendant. "I'm Fire Beacon's AI, Flying Fire," the voice replied. David looked at the pendant in the shadow attendant's hand and made a judgment in his heart. The owner of the pendant should be the owner of the spaceship. He went forward and took the pendant from the shadow attendant's hand. He waited for a minute, but did not hear any notification. "Flying Fire, answer me. Can you confirm my identity?" David asked without giving up. There was no reply. There was no sound. David put the pendant back in the shadow attendant's hand. Soon, he heard the neutral welcome. "There must be a reason I don't understand. There must be a special condition to activate this pendant. I didn't meet the condition, but the shadow attendant did." David could only understand it this way. "Flying Fire, tell me what Fire Beacon's function is?" David asked telepathically through the shadow attendant. "Captain, Fire Beacon is a spaceship inside the planet. It has the ability to hide all of its signals. Most of the Interstellar Federation scanners cannot detect Fire Beacon's existence," Flying Fire replied. David analyzed Flying Fire's situation. He estimated that Flying Fire had some sort of AI, but its existence was just like Jeremy's. It was strange everywhere. With David's electronic warfare technology, he could not find Flying Fire and Fire Beacon. It could only mean that Flying Fire was not a normal AI. Especially since Flying Fire claimed to be an AI, it proved that it was special. David then asked Flying Fire a lot of questions. However, Flying Fire would only answer questions related to the spaceship. Flying Fire was like a blank piece of paper to the rest of the questions. After staying on Fire Beacon for 20 minutes, David did not drive Fire Beacon away. He needed a place to park Fire Beacon. Jeremy was dead. At least, no one would know in a short period of time. Therefore, this place should be safe for a short period of time. He just needed to find a place that was big enough and secretive enough to store this big guy. David once again removed all traces and self-destructed all the installed programs in the industrial area. Then he sat in the Gladstone Model 3 and returned. Chapter 70. After returning home, David lay on the bed. He didn't even want to move a finger. Thinking about the abilities of Jeremy's trainer, David's heart was burning. He looked at the shadow attendant and manipulated the shadow attendant to fly to his side. As soon as he touched the shadow attendant, a warm energy poured into his body and entered his soul. He, who was originally dispirited, immediately recovered and fell into the comfortable feeling of his soul soaking in a hot spring. After David awoke from this comfortable feeling, he could clearly feel the changes in his surroundings. This kind of change would happen every time one's spirit was greatly improved. The smell around him became extremely rich. He could smell the mixture of various smells in the air and distinguish the various smells. This was something he had never felt before. If this was an ability, then this was an ability he had just mastered. At first, his spirit was improved, and it affected his vision. At that time, he saw the world with more colors, and everything was clearer. This time, his spirit was improved again, and it made his sense of smell more sensitive. He didn't know if this was inevitable or accidental. He couldn't mention this change to others. He asked the shadow attendant to open the attribute panel. He saw that his spirit was 373-1, which increased by 3 points. According to the previous calculation, Kaji's soul could increase his spirit by 1 points. The spirit increase provided by Jeremy was 3 times that of Kaji. He couldn't help but be shocked. If he knew the true strength of Jeremy in advance, would he have the courage to ambush such a powerful existence? At this time, he thought of the strange abilities of Trainer Jeremy, from the sudden appearance of the white light armor to the white light shield, the terrifying two-handed heavy sword, the footwork that allowed him to dodge bullets, the danger prediction that allowed him to sense danger in advance to avoid bullets, and a last strange attack that almost killed him. These were all revealed by Jeremy. He believed that the other party should have some tricks that he hadn't used yet. At this time, David knew that he had hit the jackpot, but he didn't know what kind of jackpot it was. He felt like ants were crawling in his heart. He pressed one hand on the shadow attendant's body and felt the shadow attendant's body. An orange ball of knowledge floated alone in the illusory body of the shadow attendant. The moment David saw the orange ball of knowledge, the disappointment in his heart was like a bucket of cold water. Now that he had obtained yellow balls of knowledge many times, he didn't care about orange balls of knowledge. When he asked the shadow attendant to change the orange ball of knowledge into a display state, he saw the information of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency. David immediately thought of the silent attack that caused him so much pain that he almost wanted to die. That attack was like an invisible thorn that pierced into his soul. I hit the jackpot. He forgot the disappointment and was extremely excited. He hadn't fused with the knowledge light balls for a few days, so his soul and body could already fuse with the knowledge light balls. How could he wait any longer after witnessing such a unique mental attack ability? Fuse. He asked the shadow attendant to send the knowledge ball of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency, into his body. Strangely, this time he felt that the knowledge ball first evolved into a seed and entered his soul. This feeling was very difficult to describe. It was just a pure feeling. Just as he was about to take a closer look, an illusion appeared. A big hand pressed on the head of the body David was in. As before, David could feel everything in his body, but he was just an observer. A strange seed entered the body's soul with the big hand. This was very similar to the situation when the knowledge ball of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency, entered his body. Then he poured his spirit into the seed every day. This was also the first time David saw a way to manipulate the spirit. The seed slowly sprouted and grew. After an unknown period of time, the seed grew into a seedling. The seedling bred a strong spirit, and as time passed, this spirit became stronger and stronger, until one day, the body emitted the spirit bred in the seedling, and the seedling suddenly withered. Then it was reinfused with spirit. Slowly, the seedling bred a new strong spirit again, and it once again had the ability to use Spirit Pierce. David woke up from the illusion. His eyes were full of doubts. This ability was called Spirit Pierce, but it could only rely on that seed. In other words, David couldn't teach this ability to others because without that seed, there would be no foundation for Spirit Pierce. It was also a strange ability, but as long as it could be used, it would be fine. He had personally experienced the horror of Spirit Pierce. He sat on the bed and began to feel the seed in his soul. If he didn't have the seed before, he wouldn't have been able to really feel his ethereal soul. Although the soul had always been in the body, most of the time it was the corresponding brain, not a real physical existence. This time was different. He felt a strange existence, and he knew in his heart that this was where his soul was. And in this strange existence, there was a seed floating. This seed was exactly the same as the seed in the illusion. David suspected that after the shadow attendant absorbed Jeremy's soul, it forcibly extracted the seed that had turned into a seedling and transformed it into the original seed. It was just that this kind of thing couldn't be explained by science, so he could only rely on guesses at most. The spirit that he didn't know how to use before was like a cloud floating in his soul. David carefully guided his spirit into the seed. He didn't know if the seed itself was already full of energy and was about to germinate, or if it looked like a seed but was actually a seedling. Just after David guided his spirit into the seed sprouted and grew quickly. It didn't take as long as it did in the illusion. It didn't take long for a strong spirit to be born in the seedling. It was different from the cloud-like spirit. This spirit was like an arrow. David ended the practice with some joy. Before he could observe the changes in his soul, he felt a strong sense of sleepiness and fell asleep. Before he went to sleep, one thing he thought in his heart was that in the future he must first finish practicing the 18 styles of body arts, and then practice the spirit piercing before going to sleep. In fact, the spirit piercing was not that simple. As a special secret skill, the only thing that was needed to practice it was a strong spirit. Because of this strict requirement, most people couldn't learn it. In addition, the spirit-piercing secret skill needed to be inherited by the predecessor of the spirit seed. Every time a spirit seed was passed down, it was a huge consumption of the inheritor's spirit. This also made the inheritor extremely cautious. The shadow attendant forcibly stripped the spirit seedling from Jeremy's soul and formed it into a seed. No inheritor would do this. This would completely cut off their own spirit-piercing practice, and it would also greatly damage their soul. David was able to breed a spirit-piercing so quickly thanks to the shadow attendant's operation. The next day at 6 o'clock, David woke up on time. He wasn't tired like the day before. Instead, he was full of energy. He knew that the best way to replenish his spirit was to have a good sleep. This was good news before he understood the spirit. He didn't have to spend too much of his spirit and affect his daily life. After he finished the 18 styles of body arts, he looked at his strength and constitution that still didn't have any changes. He felt the nature of the power in his body changing. He didn't know what kind of power would cause a qualitative change. He opened his identity bracelet and tried to contact Galen, but he realized that he couldn't contact him. In this situation, either Galen turned off his identity bracelet, or Galen left the monolith planet and went to space. Either way, it was impossible to get an answer from Galen. He looked at the map while eating the strengthened larva meat, looking for a place large enough to park the fire beacon. Maybe I should find a real estate agent and ask. After looking for a while, he gave up. Soon, he realized that professional things should be done by professionals. Chapter 71. When David returned to the living room and saw the alloy suitcase, he remembered that he was more concerned about the ability he got from Jeremy yesterday. So he just put the suitcase in the living room. Who knew that after fusing with the spirit-piercing ability, he would fall asleep, so he didn't check the items in the suitcase. He looked at the suitcase with a password and took the K2 military electronic detector. Although the password system on the suitcase was very advanced, it was only for non-professionals. As long as David had enough time, he could easily crack the password system. He didn't care much about the password system. Instead, he observed the 2 weak signals displayed on the K2 military electronic detector. It was a positioning signal device, and it was the kind that was hidden very well. If it wasn't for the K2 military electronic detector in his hand, it might have been missed. Although the password system had been cracked, David was not in a hurry to open it. Instead, he divided a part of his mind into the shadow attendant. The shadow attendant went through the alloy suitcase and entered it to check it bit by bit. This organization was too strange. He couldn't guarantee that other than the password system, they didn't have any other means that he didn't know about. The shadow attendant went in, and it was dark in front of him. However, through the shadow attendant's touch, he could feel that there were slender bottles fixed inside. However, after going through these bottles, the shadow attendant clearly felt that the thickness of the bottom of the suitcase was different. It was like there was something more. At the same time, the shadow attendant also felt a familiar energy wave. David felt this energy wave from those strange patterns. Of course, David couldn't feel this energy wave himself. Only the shadow attendant could feel it. In other words, there was some kind of special protection inside the alloy suitcase. If the method of opening it was wrong, there would be unknown consequences. Following the energy wave, the shadow attendant also found an energy net wrapped around the alloy suitcase. This made David not dare to open the suitcase directly. He didn't know what was in those small bottles, but since it was so important, it certainly wasn't something ordinary. Although he couldn't open it directly, David had a way. The security of the alloy suitcase was very tight. First of all, it was almost impossible for ordinary people to break it open. Secondly, there was the password security system in the suitcase, which was technically guaranteed to be safe. In the end, it was this strange energy web that formed the ultimate protection. Now that David had deciphered the luggage's password security system, the alloy material was even thinner than paper in front of a level 2 longsword. David used his level 2 long sword to carefully cut open the bottom surface of the suitcase while using the shadow attendant's senses to determine the range of energy fluctuations inside the suitcase. As the outermost alloy layer at the bottom was cut open, he saw the familiar strange pattern. At the same time, some of the patterns extended to the entire body of the luggage. Looking at these mysterious patterns, David always had a feeling that it was against science. He couldn't understand it, but the shadow attendant's perception was the clearest. She didn't need to look at the patterns that she couldn't understand at all. Just by looking at the flow of energy on the alloy suitcase, she could find the convergence point of the energy. At the bottom of the alloy suitcase, there was a complete, mysterious pattern. David was a little hesitant. According to the shadow attendant's perception, this was the convergence point of all the energy. There was a high possibility that he could destroy the convergence point, and then he could break the energy web. However, he didn't understand the nature of the energy web. He didn't know if doing so would cause an explosion of energy and destroy the suitcase. However, if he didn't do so, he wouldn't be able to get the items in the suitcase. Not to mention, after a long time, the organization would most likely find him through the location of the signal. After looking around, he dragged the suitcase to the underground gym. There was alloy everywhere, so even if there was an accident, there wouldn't be much loss. He also believed that with the small amount of energy that the shadow attendant sensed, it could only destroy the items in the suitcase. It was impossible for it to cause any major damage. After making up his mind, David slashed at the pattern in the center of the energy web with his level 2 sword. He felt a trace of resistance from the energy web. The moment the blue sword cut through the pattern, the resistance disappeared. The shadow attendant's mind told him that the mysterious energy web on the suitcase had disappeared. David let out a long sigh of relief. He had successfully cracked the last security measure on the suitcase. In fact, the security measure on the suitcase wasn't that easy to crack. Even if the suitcase fell into the hands of other organizations, it was basically impossible to crack it. Everything else was easy to crack, but the energy web formed by the mysterious pattern was a very special security measure. It was different from the knowledge of the Interstellar Federation. Without the shadow attendant's ability to sense the energy web, it was very likely that they wouldn't even notice it. He thought that after the password was cracked, the suitcase would be opened and everything inside would be destroyed by the explosion of energy. Even within the organization, only those with the corresponding key could open this alloy suitcase. David put his sword back into the scabbard and carefully opened the suitcase. The item that was so important to the organization was about to be completely revealed to him. In the open suitcase, he saw small bottles that looked like test tubes. They were densely packed with soft materials and filled the entire suitcase. He picked up a test tube and saw the milky white liquid inside. David realized that he couldn't recognize what it was at all. He shook his head. After spending so much effort, he didn't even know what it was used for. It was really frustrating. He counted the test tubes in the suitcase. There were 15 of them vertically and 30 horizontally. There were a total of 450 of them. He found a new suitcase and moved the 450 test tubes into the new suitcase along with the soft materials. He then used his level 2 longsword to cut the alloy suitcase into small pieces, destroying the 2 tracking chips as well. He then put them in a bag and handed them over to the AI butler, Emma. When the garbage truck arrived, Emma would hand them over to the garbage truck together with the trash in the house. David changed his clothes and went out with a relaxed body. This was the first time he went out during the day without any worries. He didn't have to worry about who would attack him. At least for a short period of time, no one would attack him. This caused him to have a rare smile on his face as he sat in the Gladstone Model 3. In the car, he opened his ID bracelet and connected to the city's news to see if there were any reports about what happened last night. Just as he thought, there was no one in the industrial area at night. The safety was all controlled by the security system. Although the battle last night was very loud, the sound was very weak after it spread out of the industrial area. Coupled with the sound from the industrial area, very few people would suspect anything. The battle last night seemed to have never happened in Parent City. The Gladstone Model 3 stopped in front of a housing agency. David jumped out of the car and walked into the agency. "Sir, I'm Nellie. How can I help you?" A female employee with long blonde hair in uniform greeted with a smile. She wasn't affected by David's overly young face at all. Of course, a big reason for this was that David had gotten out of the car in front of the real estate agency and was seen by Nellie. No matter how old the Gladstone Model 3 was, it was still a Gladstone brand. At least this young man's family background was far better than ordinary people. David, who had lived 2 lives, still couldn't get used to the excessive enthusiasm of this mature woman. He wanted to pretend to be very experienced, but his slightly nervous expression betrayed him. Nellie smiled. This kind of business was easy to discuss with this kind of big boy. It didn't take much effort at all. "I need a standalone house with a big yard. It would be better if there's a large basement." David thought and proposed his request. "You only have a request for the yard and nothing else?" Nellie continued to ask with a smile. "Yes, I need something that can be done immediately. I don't have much time to wait," David replied. Chapter 72. The Gladstone Model 3 drove David and Nellie towards the east of the city. Nellie continuously introduced the benefits of the residence to David. David listened to her introduction. The residence was located between the middle of the city and the slums. The price of the residence there was not expensive. The most important thing was that it was large enough. The courtyard was at least 1,000 square meters, and there was also an underground space of 500 square meters. It could be said that if he followed these conditions, it would be very suitable for his needs. Therefore, he brought Nellie to view the house. Only he, who had bought a house in his previous life, had some expectations for the house in his heart. As they approached the target on the map, David saw that the surroundings had become somewhat spacious. It was currently daytime, but there were very few people on the streets. "Mr. David, it's right here." Nellie smiled as she led David to a large steel door as soon as she got out of the car. David sized up the place. It was very rare to see a house with a courtyard in the center of the city. That was because every inch of land there was worth an inch of gold. A courtyard was definitely an extremely luxurious choice. The courtyard walls were built with stones that were unique to this place and were sufficiently sturdy. The door was made of ordinary steel, not reinforced synthetic steel. In terms of security, it was not even as secure as a stone wall. However, this did not matter. The speed of construction in this world was unimaginable. If necessary, as long as one was willing to spend credits, one could completely renovate this place from the inside out within a day. Nellie pressed lightly on her identity wristband, and the door automatically opened. She had the corresponding rights to visit this kind of residential property. As soon as they entered the door, they saw a large courtyard. There were also some rusty fitness equipment in the courtyard. It was probably left behind by the previous owner. The ground was also paved with stones. There were not even the most basic ornamental plants, making the courtyard look extremely spacious. "Mr. David, you can modify this place as you wish. With such a large environment, you can definitely build a landscape. You can place chairs for resting here. You can even place a swing here. You can dig a pond here and set up a botanical garden here." Nellie explained to David as they walked. Even if David did not know much about this world, as a person who had lived 2 lives, he could hear the deception in Nellie's words. Was the pool so easy to fix? The entire parent city's water supply was supplied by the city's underground water. If one wanted to build a pool and ensure a constant supply of water, the credits required would be enough to buy another house. Not to mention the botanical garden and landscape. All of these required a large amount of credits, and they were not things that a residence in this location would be equipped with. The underground space was completely empty. Other than some rubbish, there was nothing of value. The decorations in the 2-story house were also very ordinary. There was nothing praiseworthy about it, but according to Nellie, every part of the house was full of surprises. According to Nellie, as long as they added a little bit here and there, the house would become a perfect house. After looking around, David waved his hand and interrupted Nellie's words when he returned to the courtyard. Miss Nellie, I want this house. How much is the lowest price? Mr. David, you said you want it? Nellie's words were interrupted. She couldn't help but be stunned when she heard David's words. She asked in disbelief, "Is there a problem?" David looked at Nellie in confusion. "No, the lowest price is 90,000 credits. What do you think?" Nellie hurriedly shook her head and continued, "Go through the formalities immediately. I'll pay now." David nodded in agreement. He really didn't care about such a small amount of money. He didn't even need to use his secret account for this amount of money. His own savings were enough. The transfer of ownership was much simpler than David had imagined. Nellie drafted an application, and after David agreed, she submitted it to Skynet. It was currently working hours, and David believed that it would be approved in a short while. Hence, Nellie and David waited where they were. There was a contact request on David's identity bracelet. When the call connected, he heard Jim's voice. "David, I'm at your doorstep. Where are you?" "I bought a house in the east of the city. I just finished the handover procedures." David replied with a smile. He didn't hide anything. "Where are you? You didn't even inform me when you bought a house." "I'll go over now," Jim complained. David had no choice but to send his location to Jim. Jim immediately cut off the call. "Mr. David, do you have a friend coming over?" Nellie asked with a smile when she overheard David's call. As a real estate agent, she naturally wanted to form a good relationship with a high-quality client like David. Moreover, friends who could be with David would naturally be high-quality clients as well. Hence, she was very happy that David had a friend coming over. In less than 20 minutes, David, who was looking around the courtyard, heard a roaring sound coming from outside the door. It was the sound of Jim's military hover car. "David, why did you choose this location? Were you cheated?" Jim asked bluntly as he walked through the door and saw the scene in the courtyard. Nellie, who was about to go up and greet Jim, was almost angered to death when she heard this. "I'm just looking for a house with a courtyard. I still have some credits on hand for the other places. I'm planning to tear them all down and redecorate them." David explained with a smile. He knew Jim's personality well. "I really don't understand. Why'd you buy a house here? If you want a house with a big courtyard, I can help you find one." Jim shook his head, indicating that he didn't understand David's thoughts. David didn't want to look for a house through Jim at all. He needed to hide his aircraft. It wasn't for living. He just needed to set up the security system. "Mr. David, the review has been approved. Let's complete the transaction." Nellie, who was at the side, saw that the application had been approved by Skynet. She didn't dare let Jim continue speaking like this. She hurriedly interrupted the conversation between the two and reminded them. David smiled at Jim. He then checked the information on Skynet. The application was approved by Skynet in just over half an hour. David couldn't help but marvel at the speed at which things were handled. After transferring 90,000 credits to Nellie, the ownership of this house was added to his identity bracelet. The transaction was completed in a short time. Nellie was obviously relieved. David couldn't help but feel a little strange. Someone actually dares to buy a house without giving us a heads up. 5 tall men walked in from the open door. The man in the lead had a mocking smile on his face as he spoke. When Nellie saw the newcomers, she hurriedly retreated to avoid them. "David, I'm dying of laughter. Didn't you inquire about the situation of this house before buying it?" Jim couldn't help but laugh as he spoke to David. As the second generation of Parent City's top military force, why would Jim care about these people? Even with David's own strength, he wouldn't care about such things. What Jim was laughing at was David's behavior of directly conducting a large transaction without even asking about the situation. David glanced at Nellie, who didn't dare to look him in the eye. He then turned to Jim and replied helplessly, "How would I know? I just took a fancy to the space here. It's not bad. David, let me handle this. Who told me to owe you?" Jim said, waving his hand. "Who are you people? You sure talk big. Do you know?" Before the man in the lead could finish his words, he saw a short gun pointed at his nose. "According to the principle of inviolability of private property, you are trespassing on private property. Now, stand where you are. Don't give me any chance to misunderstand. I have 40 bullets in this gun. I'll fire all of them when I sense any danger." Jim said with a smile as he opened his identity bracelet to input information. The man who didn't finish his words felt a chill run down his spine. Jim was too casual, as if he didn't care about them at all. Because of this, the man felt that Jim was even more terrifying. The five of them stood where they were and didn't even dare to move a finger. David, do you want the construction team to help you renovate? I still have some abandoned special steel. I can use it to reinforce this place. Jim stopped typing and raised his head to ask. I have some requests here. Also, can your construction team handle the security system here? David naturally wouldn't reject Jim's request. The construction team of the city defense has nothing to do every day. I asked them to come here for training. As long as they have the materials, you can tell them if you have any suggestions. Jim said with a smile. They'll be here in 15 minutes. He quickly finished typing on his identity bracelet and said to David with a smile. Chapter 73. David, I still have 5,000 credits left from last time. I'll transfer it to you. Jim said hurriedly as he suddenly remembered the purpose of his visit. Forget it. Just treat it as payment for our next trip. David shook his head and refused. Okay, I'll remember it. Jim nodded in agreement. He was not the kind of person who cared about credits. How's De Quincy? David asked as he thought about De Quincy's injury. It's not a big deal, but he won't be able to go out for a while. Jim smiled and shook his head. He then continued. De Quincy has always wanted to thank you. Let's meet up when we have time. Okay, you guys pick a place then. David nodded in agreement. The five people at the side watched the two of them chatting as if there was no one else around. Although they really wanted to do something, they only saw that although Jim was chatting the whole time, his hand holding the gun was very stable, so they gave up on the idea. 15 minutes later, 3 military transport spaceships flew in from the sky. Jim, I'm not late, am I? A staff sergeant jumped down from the military transport spaceship and greeted Jim with a smile. Edgar, you already know the situation. Just treat it as training and renovate the courtyard. Use the extra batch of materials from my shooting range, Jim said as he put away his weapon and punched the staff sergeant with a smile. No problem. My men are too idle. I'll find something for them to do. Staff Sergeant Edgar nodded in agreement. He then patted the place where he was punched and said with a smile, Your strength hasn't improved. David, this is Edgar. If you have any requests, feel free to ask. Jim turned to David and introduced him. David saw the interaction between Jim and Staff Sergeant Edgar and knew that their relationship was very close. It was very likely that Staff Sergeant Edgar was First Lieutenant Eaton's loyal subordinate. Sergeant Edgar, sorry to trouble you, David said politely. David, you're Jim's friend, which means you're my friend too. You can just call me by my name. I'm an engineering soldier, so I don't follow the rules of fighters. Staff Sergeant Edgar said enthusiastically. David explained his idea. In fact, he didn't care about anything else. He only needed to reinforce this place and then open a 20-meter by 20-meter entrance to the basement in the courtyard, connecting to the basement below. 4 hours, Staff Sergeant Edgar said confidently after hearing the request. Edgar, transfer 2 heavy machine guns to David. Put it on the shooting gallery's account. Jim suggested. Jim, I'll pay the credits myself. You've helped enough. David immediately interrupted. David, you saved my life. I can help you get some weapons, but when you go to non-university, I won't be able to help you even if I wanted to, Jim said with a wave of his hand. At this time, 20 soldiers in engineering maintenance armor jumped down from the 3 military transport spaceships and started working without saying a word. The 5 intruders and Nellie were so shocked by this scene that their faces turned ashen. The 5 intruders didn't know what these soldiers would do to them, while Nellie was afraid that David would take revenge on her for hiding the situation of this house. They all knew that they couldn't afford to offend someone who could casually transfer the army. On planet Monolith, it was better to offend the police than the army. The police would reason with you and talk about the law, but the army would use war as an exception to deal with any problems. Hand over your ID bracelets and get lost. If there's any trouble in this house in the future, I'll look for you directly," Jim said in a deep voice as he looked at the 5 uneasy people. "Yes, of course, of course." The 5 of them hurriedly handed over their ID bracelets and answered as they retreated. Jim didn't plan to do anything to them. He was just trying to scare them. It would be troublesome to deal with such small fries. Originally, he wanted to send a few soldiers from the city defense brigade to scare them, but David needed engineering soldiers, so he sent the engineering team over. It seemed that the results were just as good. "Mr. David, can I leave now?" Nellie asked with a trembling voice. She was no longer as eloquent as before. She was just trying her best to show her weakness so that David would feel pity for her. David didn't want to make things difficult for her. He waved his hand and sent her away. "David, leave this to Edgar. Find a place to sit," Jim said softly to David when he saw that there was no one else. "Is there anything else?" David asked when he understood. "Yes, it's about Lovell, the venomous snake." Jim nodded and said softly. David got into Jim's military hovercar and found a quiet drink shop nearby. He sat down and ordered 2 cups of natural fruit juice. "David, Lovell the venomous snake confessed something. You need to be careful," Jim reminded him when he saw the waiter leave. David wasn't surprised that Lovell the venomous snake confessed. There were countless ways to make people confess once they fell into the hands of the military. Compared to the more civilized police, the military had fewer scruples when doing things. "What's the news?" David wasn't worried. He knew very well that he had killed the organization's biggest leader last night. He just wanted to know how much information the military had. Lovell the venomous snake belongs to an underground organization. At present, 25 crows belonging to this underground organization have been captured by the military. It's just that no one knows who the leader of this organization is. The members of the Blood Hand are all paid for their service. Jim told him what he knew. David couldn't help but click his tongue. He killed Trainer Jeremy in one night, and the military caught 25 of Lovell's accomplices in one night. At the same time, they found out the forces behind them. The military's efficiency was so strong that it was terrifying. Will the military hand over the case to the police? David also wanted to know the outcome of this case, so he continued to ask. If it was still in the hands of the military, then the military would punish these people according to the war regulations. These people may be directly executed. If it was transferred to the police, then there would be a lot of trouble in the future. At least David, the person involved, would have to give a statement and a witness. They don't have a chance to transfer it to the police system. According to the news I heard, these crows actually used the opportunity of going in and out of the city defense to sell the city defense information to the leader of the Blood Hand organization. In essence, this is no longer a normal case, but a military espionage case. Jim said with a mocking smile. Selling the Interstellar Federation military's information in the war zone, these crows really dared to do anything for money. Although Parent City was only a small city, all the information of the military was equally important. Anyone who dared to spy on the military's information was an enemy of the military. David, Lovell the venomous snake, said that before you and I arrived at the south of the city, he received an urgent mission from the Blood Hand. The bottle of brain fluid that bewitched the brain worm was also given to him by the leader of the Blood Hand. It seems like someone has been monitoring you and wants to deal with you. You must be careful. The military will also dig deeper. Jim continued. The two stayed in the beverage store for a while before returning to their newly bought house. The house was completely different at this time. The courtyard walls were replaced with special steel walls. The door had an obvious military style. It should have been obtained from the military. After entering the door, David saw the entire courtyard that was made of special steel. The house was completely demolished and replaced with a military-style 2-story steel building. David obviously knew that this wasn't some abandoned special steel. Needless to say, a 2-story building that was built in such a short time was obtained from the military and directly pieced together. When Jim and David arrived, the construction was already finished. It had only been 3 hours, but the entire courtyard was empty. "Jim, you must calculate the cost of this place for me." David looked at the courtyard in front of him and turned to Jim. The cost of this courtyard was definitely not low. Based on his contact with Jim, the cost was definitely not paid by the military, but by Jim himself. He didn't want such a big favor. "David, take care of the house yourself. I'm leaving first." Jim smiled and waved his hand before turning to leave. Chapter 74. David went to the first floor and found the security system. He did not need to hack it, as he had full access to it. It was a set of military security system, including the 2 defensive heavy machine guns in the yard. As long as it was set up properly, it could choose to detect an unknown intruder, issue a warning, and then fire. Defensive heavy machine guns were 2 different concepts compared to heavy machine guns that could be used by individual soldiers. Defensive heavy machine guns were bigger and had a faster firing speed. For example, David's 2 heavy machine guns, which were each equipped with 20,000 bullets, would lose their ability to fight after a minute. However, within a minute, the 2 defensive heavy machine guns would fire 40,000 rounds of bullets. As long as it was not Kaji wearing exoskeleton armor, the 40,000 bullets would be enough to destroy any intruder. This was also a war zone like Parent City. If it were a peaceful planet, it would be impossible to install such weapons on civilian facilities. David took out his identity bracelet and opened the weapon column of his reserve combat personnel status. There were 2 additional heavy machine guns. Jim had always been steady in his work. He had taken care of everything properly. Of course, Jim dared to do this because the house was close to the slums. It was impossible to install such heavy machine guns in David's house in the city center. The security issue that David was most concerned about was no longer a concern under the protection of the military security system and the 2 heavy machine guns. He went to the yard, opened the interface of the military security system in his identity bracelet, and chose to open the underground passage. Then, in the center of the yard, 2 huge pieces of special steel were separated to the left and right, revealing a passage. At the end of the passage was the basement of the house. However, the actual basement space had long exceeded the specified size of the house. David quickly opened the property of the house and saw that the usable area of the basement had been doubled to 800 square meters. "Power!" David could not help but exclaim. Although Jim had spent a lot of money on this, if it were not for his father's identity as First Lieutenant Jim, he would not have been able to do all this so smoothly. Even if David were to spend double the amount of credits, he would not be able to accomplish this within a short time. When they arrived at the basement was also wrapped in special steel. This time, the consumption of special steel alone was a huge number. Of course, the value of special steel on the Monolith Star was not high because the Monolith Star produced its own steel. There was a sizable mine near Parent City, which was why steel was the first choice for most middle-class families. After reading this, David reinforced the military security system. This did not mean that his ability was stronger than the military security system. Instead, he connected the medium-sized server at home to the security system so that the military security system could borrow the computing power of the medium-sized server. Seeing that it was still early, he ordered an AI butler. After waiting for an hour, the AI butler arrived, costing him 5,000 credits. The sky gradually darkened. David hailed a public transport hover car and headed to the industrial area. Outside the garbage disposal factory, David carefully observed the situation inside. At this time, it was off work, and the inside was under the supervision of the security system. Along the way, every door in front of him would automatically open. When he arrived at the last warehouse, he used the K2 military electronic detector to check the history of the security photon computer. He realized that no one had entered this warehouse before. As he walked into the warehouse, he opened the floor excitedly, revealing the strange outer shell of the fire beacon. After passing the pendant to the shadow attendant, the fire beacon opened a passage to enter. "Flying Fire, start the main engine. Prepare to take off." David ordered Flying Fire telepathically through the shadow attendant. "Yes, Captain." Flying Fire's voice was heard in the fire beacon. Following that, The hull of the fire beacon trembled slightly, but there was no loud rumbling. It was as if all sound had been isolated. However, according to the data displayed on the front of the fire beacon, it had enough energy and could take off at any time. David used the K2 military electronic detector to open the roof of the warehouse. Then, like a soundless bat, the fire beacon flew through the roof of the warehouse and into the sky. This was David's first time flying alone. The hover cars before were less than 1 meter above the ground. He had only taken military transport spaceships when he was following the military. However, it was a completely different experience compared to his personal spaceship. David placed the K2 military electronic detector in front of him and paid attention to whether there were any external signals tracking the fire beacon. The facts proved that flying fire did not lie about the fire beacon's ability. The Skynet system protecting Monolith, including the parent city's own air defense system, did not detect the fire beacon. Under the cover of the night, David flew straight into the sky. Looking at Parent City on the ground, getting smaller and smaller, he did not immediately drive the fire beacon back to the shelter that he had built. Instead, he flew into the sky in the wilderness. David felt that the fire beacon should be called Black Phantom, other than its special and eye-catching appearance. As long as it was not seen directly with the eyes in the dark, all kinds of scanning devices would not be able to detect the fire beacon at all. This was the perfect aircraft for infiltration. In fact, this aircraft was specially customized by trainer Jeremy for his own safety. It used the special technology of the organization and part of the military equipment of the Interstellar Federation. It could be said that once trainer Jeremy was discovered in the city, he could drive the fire beacon out of Parent City at any time. Even if it was daytime and the distance of the naked eye was limited, as long as the fire beacon took off, the pursuers would not be able to find him. David flew in the sky happily and enjoyed the greatest joy of the galactic era. It was not until the identity bracelet reminded him that it was time to practice the 18 styles of the physical arts that he used the shadow attendant to control the fire beacon and fly to the shelter. When the fire beacon flew into the basement and David closed the basement, he realized that he had actually driven this strange spaceship back. He did not return to his original home. Instead, he practiced the 18 styles of the physical arts in his new home and rested. Jeremy is missing. Go to Parent City and investigate. This time, Jeremy also went missing with a batch of holy water of eternal youth. That is a year's supply for the organization's intelligence network. Bring it back with all your might. The white figure ordered in a deep voice. This was a basement in Kia City. A tall man in a police uniform was standing in front of a pitch-black altar with his back bowed, listening to the orders of the white figure in the black fog on the altar. Kia City was a large city with a population of close to 50 million. At the same time, there were 5 large mining areas, 1 Krypton crystal mine, and many other small and medium-sized mining areas around the city. This allowed the population to remain high. Sir, is this batch of holy water of eternal youth still here? The man in the police uniform asked the most important question. He was very clear about the organization's process of transporting such special supplies. Once the supplies fell into the hands of others, they would self-destruct. I've used a secret technique to check. This batch of holy water of eternal youth is still here. I'm not sure if the other party did not open the box, or if they had a way to open the box without damaging the items inside. I'll need you to investigate this, the white figure said with certainty. The man in the police uniform did not doubt at all. Since the master had said so, then it must be true. At the same time, he also understood the importance of this mission. A batch of holy water of eternal youth was so important that it could affect the organization's control over all the important information points. Without this batch of holy water of eternal youth, some of the people who were bribed with holy water of eternal youth would lose control. However, it was not easy to obtain holy water of eternal youth. Even if the organization obtained it again, it would take a long time. In addition to the transportation process, it would take at least half a year for the next batch of holy water of eternal youth to be replenished. Therefore, finding holy water of eternal youth became the most important mission. At the same time, he knew that Jeremy was the master's confidant. Jeremy's disappearance was not a small matter. Of course, he also knew the importance of this mission. The fact that the master could risk his life to investigate the holy water of eternal youth instead of investigating whether Jeremy was dead or alive was enough to show who was more important. Every time the master used this kind of investigation ability, he would have to pay the price with his life. Jeremy was not worth it. Chapter 75. Without the pressure of being watched all the time, David's physical training seemed to be more effective recently. He didn't know if it was a psychological factor or the effect of the zero. 3 of spirit. After many days of physical training, his body was getting heavier and heavier. This kind of weight was not reflected in the actual weight, but it was a feeling. It was a feeling of the integration of strength and body. Although his strength, physique, and agility did not change, he still felt that he was getting stronger day by day. On the night of January 25th, David's peaceful life was once again broken. The special code he left in the security system of Trainer Jeremy's house was triggered. The only trigger condition for this special code was that someone entered the basement. David didn't go into Trainer Jeremy's basement. It was too strange there. He didn't know if there would be any unexpected trouble. He got enough benefits, and he didn't want to be greedy. The entrance to Trainer Jeremy's basement was also hidden by mysterious patterns. Even if someone entered, they wouldn't find the basement. Now that someone had triggered the special code, it meant that someone had access to the basement, or someone from the organization came to investigate Trainer Jeremy's situation. An hour later, the security optical computer of the warehouse at the garbage treatment plant also sent a message to him. Someone had also gone to check it out. Unfortunately, the other party was very professional. Their whole body was wrapped in loose clothes, and their face was also covered by a hood. He couldn't even tell if they were a man or a woman. It was also this kind of clothing that made David even more certain that the other party came for Trainer Jeremy. David took out the 450 test tubes from the basement and sent them to the house he defined as a hidden place overnight. Although if someone had the authority to check his information, they would find the house under his name. However, the security system there was more powerful, and there were powerful defensive heavy machine guns. In addition, these test tubes were placed in the fire beacon. It was the safest place, he thought. In the next few days, there were no waves. If David didn't receive a message from the two security systems, he would think that the organization didn't have time to respond. On the morning of the 29th of January, after David finished practicing the 18 styles of physical skills, he selected literature, mathematics, and general studies from his bracelet and began to read them. Since school was going to start tomorrow, he also needed to make some preparations. According to the notice from the school, there would be a mock exam at the beginning of school. This exam would determine the learning plan that the school would make for the students in the last half of the semester. Although it was the interstellar era, in terms of education, students were still gathered in schools and teachers were teaching face-to-face. This was the consensus reached by the Interstellar Federation after countless years of practice and the most scientific proof. Humans had to experience how to get along with their own kind from a young age. This was even more important than the knowledge learned in school. Only after experiencing this would one be able to better integrate into society, whether it was working or becoming a soldier. Of course, it wasn't that there was no elite education, but it had nothing to do with David, who was from a small city. Even the second generation of small cities like Myron and Jim didn't have much to do with it. They didn't have enough talent in small cities, so they didn't have the opportunity to get an elite education. Getting into non-university was the only way for them to get an elite education. Whether it was in terms of cultural knowledge or kaji, it was the same. Graduating from a famous school would give them a lot of extra points, and they would become part of the elites in the future. David didn't have much ambition. He didn't want to become a politician, nor did he want to become a tycoon. He just wanted to have the ability to protect himself. David opened the door. It was only 9 o'clock. David was still trying to be a good student when Myron's call came. When David opened the door, he saw Myron standing in front of the door in his Federation uniform. "Myron, you didn't play until now last night, did you?" David looked at Myron's Federation uniform and couldn't help but make fun of him. Myron's clothes were too formal. This was something that was only worn for formal events. It was indeed strange to see it in the morning. "David, school starts tomorrow. There's a special event today. I invited you to go with me to broaden your horizons." Myron didn't mind David's teasing and said excitedly, "I'm not going. You go have fun." David hurriedly shook his head. He felt that this kind of Federation uniform was too restrictive. He didn't want to participate. "David, I took my father's card. This event is very rare, and my father just happened to be in a meeting. So we got lucky," Myron said with a mysterious smile. David was a little tempted. This was an event that only Mayor Bernard was qualified to participate in. This was the chance to get in touch with the most secretive side of the Federation. "Can you tell me what the event is first?" David asked. "The Titan Financial Group has brought a batch of top-grade goods to Raber City to hold an auction. Let's go have a look," Myron explained with a smile. David had heard of the Titan Financial Group a long time ago. It was one of the largest financial groups on the Monolith Star. It was involved in industries such as military, medicine, spaceships, and so on. It was also a well-known company that made exoskeleton armor. Its Titan exoskeleton armor series was the top exoskeleton armor on the Monolith Star. "Myron, the auction has nothing to do with us, right?" David was very tempted. However, it wasn't worth it to go to Raber City, which was 1,000 kilometers away, just for an auction like this. 1,000 kilometers wasn't far for a spaceship, but it was still dangerous. Especially for people like David who hadn't left Parent City. He was worried about the long journey. "My father asked me to bring some credits to help him buy something." Of course, this isn't just an auction. The Titan Financial Group also has some activities for us young people. If we win a big prize, there will be very good prizes. I heard that they even took out a Kaji weapon made by Titan as a prize. Myron proudly introduced. "Okay, but how do we get to Raber City?" David immediately agreed and asked. "Don't worry, the Sky Patroller is very safe," Myron replied with a smile. He then nudged David and said, "Hurry up and change into your suit. There's not much time left." David quickly changed into his suit. After thinking for a while, he put the scabbard on his back. "Forget it. Bring the sword. It's actually very safe this time." Myron wanted to say something, but he knew David's character and didn't try to persuade him. They arrived at the space station. With the invitation card in Myron's hand, the two directly went through the VIP passage and arrived at the waiting area. As soon as they arrived at the waiting area, they saw acquaintances. Jim waved his hand and called out, "David, Myron!" Daly was beside him. After a few days of getting to know each other, David also learned about Daly's identity. Daly's father was the captain of the Kaji Squadron, and his position in the City Defense Brigade was second only to Lieutenant Eaton. The father of De Quincy, who was injured last time, was Deputy Mayor Jasper. Deputy Mayor Jasper was another force of Parent City's government. His connections in Parent City were intertwined and had great influence. It was estimated that David's background was the weakest among these people. However, the genius he displayed and the potential relationship with Hans made his friends not dare to look down on him. After greeting each other, Myron looked at Jim and Daly and asked, "Are you two going to Raber City as well?" "Haha, except for the items that the older generation paid special attention to. This kind of auction is basically for the younger generation to participate and use this opportunity to make some new friends," Jim explained with a smile. "Myron, so you don't know much about this either." David looked at Myron helplessly. Myron was the one who brought him here, but even he didn't know the key point. "David, the invitation card allows you to bring one person with you. I've confirmed this." Myron hurriedly shook the invitation card and explained, "You're here too." De Quincy appeared in the waiting area in a white windbreaker and black riding boots. He greeted them with a smile as soon as he arrived. "Umph." Myron snorted softly when he saw De Quincy. "David, come with us. It'll be safer with you around." De Quincy ignored Myron and said enthusiastically to David. Jim and Daly looked at each other helplessly. With these two guys who didn't get along, this trip was going to be interesting. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.